I woke up with a needle mark in my arm and $20,000 missing from my account. My entire family had vanished in the middle of the night. Parents, sister. Everyone leaving me drugged and alone in our empty house, while they flew to Napa Valley to throw my sister's dream wedding with money they stole from me while I was unconscious. The wine my mother insisted I drink. The injection site poorly hidden under a bandage I didn't apply. The security cameras mysteriously disabled at exactly 2:58 a.m. Every detail had been carefully planned. They thought I'd wake up too late to stop them, that I'd be too ashamed to make a scene, too conditioned after 38 years of being the family's silent ATM to finally fight back. They were wrong. By the time their plane landed, I'd already frozen every fraudulent charge. By the time the ceremony was supposed to start, the resort had suspended all services. By the time my sister walked down the aisle in front of horrified guests, her perfect day was collapsing into a public disaster that would be filmed, shared, and immortalized across social media. But that was just the beginning, because when I opened my dead grandmother's memory box, the one they'd stolen and accidentally left behind in their panic, I discovered she'd been watching them for years, documenting their crimes, building evidence, and she'd left me something that would destroy them completely. A hidden ledger stitched into a quilt, legal documents they never knew existed, and proof that this wasn't just about a stolen credit card. This was about a father's secret second family, a mother's embezzled church funds, years of financial abuse disguised as love, and a grandmother who'd armed me from the grave with everything I needed to burn their perfect lives to the ground. 3 days later, when they came home screaming about their ruined wedding, I was waiting, and I was smiling. Because revenge isn't just sweet, it's legal documented and absolutely devastating when you do it right. This is my story. And trust me, you won't believe where it goes. My name is Danielle Carter. And at 38 years old, I thought I'd finally figured out how to survive my family. I work as a senior financial analyst at a mid-sized tech firm in Silicon Valley, a job that requires precision patience and the ability to see patterns others miss. Those same skills, I'm ashamed to say, never helped me see the pattern that mattered most, how disposable I'd always been to the people who were supposed to love me. The first thing I noticed when consciousness crept back was the cold. Not the comfortable cool of air conditioning, but the bone-deep chill of a house where the heating has been off for hours, where no warm bodies move through rooms, where life itself seems to have been drained away. My head felt like it had been stuffed with cotton and broken glass simultaneously, a nauseating throb that pulsed behind my eyes with each heartbeat. When I tried to sit up, the room tilted violently to the left, and I had to grip the armrest of the couch to keep from sliding onto the floor. Couch. I was on the living room couch. Why was I on the couch? I forced my eyes to focus, blinking against the harsh afternoon sunlight streaming through the bay window. The grandfather clock in the hallway, my grandmother's antique that had stood in this spot for 20 years, ticked its steady rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Each sound felt like a small hammer against my skull. On the coffee table in front of me sat a wine glass, still half full of red wine, that had started to separate a thin film forming on the surface. I didn't remember drinking wine. I didn't remember much of anything after dinner last night. Dinner. There had been dinner. Mom had made her special lasagna, the one she only made for important occasions. Emma's wedding was tomorrow. No, wait, today. What day was it? Dad had been quiet through the meal unusually, so while Mom had chattered nervously about last-minute details, Emma had been upstairs packing, too busy to join us, and Mom had poured me wine, insisting I relax, saying I'd been working too hard and needed to unwind before the big day. The memory felt slippery, like trying to hold water in my hands. I pushed myself fully upright, and that's when I felt it, a small, sharp sting on my inner left arm. I looked down and my stomach dropped. There was a needle mark, small and precise, right in the crook of my elbow where veins run close to the surface. A piece of medical tape covered it, applied hastily, one corner already peeling away from my skin. I stared at it for a long moment, my sluggish brain trying to make sense of what I was seeing. I hadn't given blood. I hadn't been to a doctor. I hadn't injected anything. Someone else had done this to me. The realization cut through the fog in my head like a blade. My heart began to race, adrenaline flooding my system and sharpening my senses with sudden, awful clarity. I stood up too quickly and had to steady myself against the couch as another wave of dizziness washed over me. The house was silent. Completely, utterly silent except for that relentless ticking clock. "Mom!" My voice came out as a croak. I cleared my throat and tried again louder. "Dad, Emma." Nothing. No footsteps upstairs. No water running in the kitchen. No television humming from my parents' bedroom. No signs of life anywhere. I stumbled toward the stairs, gripping the banister as I climbed. Each step felt like a monumental effort, my legs weak and uncooperative. Emma's bedroom door stood open, and when I looked inside, my chest tightened. The room was empty. Not just empty of people, but empty of the chaos that had filled it for weeks. The bridesmaid dresses hanging on the closet door were gone. The makeup and hair products that had cluttered her vanity had vanished. Even the suitcases that had been packed and waiting by her bed were nowhere to be seen. My parents' room told the same story. Suitcases gone. My father's good suit missing from the closet. My mother's expensive handbag that she only used for special occasions, not on its usual shelf. They had left. All of them. Without me. I made my way back downstairs, my mind racing now, despite the lingering drug-induced fog. In the kitchen, I grabbed my purse from the counter where I'd left it last night. Wallet still inside. I opened it with shaking hands. Credit cards, driver's license, everything seemed to be there. But when I pulled out my phone from the side pocket, the screen lit up with notifications that made my blood run cold. 17 text alerts from my credit card company. Fraud detection warnings. Large transactions requiring confirmation. I opened my banking app with fumbling fingers, and the numbers on the screen seemed to swim before my eyes. A charge for $12,000 at the Silverstone Resort and Spa, Napa Valley. Processed at 3:47 in the morning. Another for $3,500 to Wellington Wedding Services. Timestamp 4:02 a.m. $2,800 to Premier Transportation Services. 4:15 a.m. $1,700 to something called VIP Coordination and Events. 4:23 a.m. The charges went on and on, a cascading list of transactions that added up to just over $20,000, the entire limit on my emergency credit card, the one I'd kept for years and never used, the one that was supposed to be for true crises only. All of it gone. All of it charged in the dead of night while I was unconscious on the couch downstairs with a needle mark in my arm. I had to read the screen 3 times before my brain would accept what my eyes were seeing. This wasn't possible. This couldn't be real. But the numbers didn't lie. Numbers never lied. That was the first thing they taught you in my line of work. My gaze drifted to the dining room table where wedding paraphernalia had been scattered for weeks. Invitation samples, seating charts, vendor contracts. Most of it had been cleared away, but one item remained standing upright against the salt shaker, like it had been deliberately positioned for me to find. Emma's wedding invitation. Cream-colored cardstock with elegant gold lettering. I'd seen it 100 times, had even helped Emma pick out the design. But I'd never noticed the handwritten message at the bottom added in my mother's distinctive cursive. "We'll make you proud, Danny." I picked up the invitation with numb fingers, staring at those words. "We'll make you proud," as if I were a benevolent aunt sending her blessing from afar, as if I weren't supposed to be there. As if they hadn't planned for me to be there at all. The pieces fell into place with horrible crystalline clarity. The special dinner, the wine my mother insisted I drink, the unusually quiet house afterward, waking up alone drugged with my credit card maxed out and my family gone. They hadn't forgotten to wake me. They hadn't made a mistake. They had planned this. I stood in that silent house, my childhood home that suddenly felt like a crime scene, holding my sister's wedding invitation in one hand and my phone with its devastating list of charges in the other. The grandfather clock continued its steady ticking, marking seconds that felt like they were stretching into eternities. My family hadn't just left me behind. They didn't forget me. They erased me. I sank into the kitchen chair, still clutching that wedding invitation, and let myself remember what I'd spent years trying to forget. The memories came flooding back with cruel clarity, no longer softened by the lies I'd told myself about family loyalty and unconditional love. I was 7 years old the first time I understood I was different from Emma. It was report card day, and I'd brought home straight A's for the third consecutive semester. I remember running into the house, backpack bouncing against my shoulders, so proud I could barely contain it. Mom was in the living room folding laundry, and I thrust the report card at her with both hands like it was a trophy. She glanced at it, nodded once, and said, "That's nice, dear. Go wash your hands for dinner." That was it. No praise, no celebration. Just acknowledgement that I'd met the baseline expectation. 2 hours later, 5-year-old Emma toddled in from kindergarten with a drawing she'd made in art class. It was a stick figure family rendered in crayon, barely recognizable as human forms. Mom's entire face transformed. She swept Emma into her arms, covered her with kisses, and taped that drawing to the refrigerator with 4 magnets like it was a masterpiece headed for the Louvre. She called Dad at work to tell him about Emma's incredible artistic talent. She called Grandma. She took a photo to show the neighbors. I stood in the doorway watching this display of affection, my perfect report card forgotten on the counter, and something inside me quietly broke. That became the pattern of my childhood. Every achievement I earned through hard work and discipline was met with a brief nod, a distracted "good job," before attention swiveled back to Emma, whose smallest efforts were celebrated as miracles. When I made the honor roll every semester, it was expected. When Emma passed a single difficult test, we had ice cream to celebrate. When I won the regional science fair in 8th grade, Mom attended the ceremony but spent the entire time on her phone. When Emma got cast as a background dancer in the middle school musical, Dad took time off work to attend every single performance, filming each one from 3 different angles. I learned quickly that love in the Carter household wasn't freely given. It was earned through compliance, through not making waves, through sacrificing my own needs to keep everyone else comfortable. I became the easy child, the one who didn't require attention or validation, the one who could be counted on to understand when my needs came last. Because surely, I told myself, if I was good enough, helpful enough, selfless enough, eventually they would see me the way they saw Emma. My father had been different once, or maybe I'd just imagined it that way because the truth was too painful. There were vague memories of him from my early childhood, teaching me to ride a bicycle in the driveway, his steady hand on the seat as I wobbled forward, reading me bedtime stories in different voices that made me giggle, calling me his little scholar when I showed him my homework. But somewhere around the time Emma was born, that warmth evaporated like morning dew under a harsh sun. He became a shadow in our house, physically present but emotionally absent. The man who once engaged with me became someone who merely existed in the same space, moving through rooms like a ghost. And when conflicts arose between me and Mom, which they inevitably did as I grew older and started to question why I was always the one expected to compromise, he never once took my side. He would sit silently at the dinner table while Mom criticized my choices, my appearance, my failures to meet her impossible standards. If I looked to him for support, I'd find him studying his plate with intense fascination, as if the arrangement of peas and potatoes held secrets of the universe. The worst part was the day I found him buying toys at Target when I was 10 years old. Children's toys, brightly colored, age-appropriate for a young child. But they weren't for me, and Emma was too old for them by then. When I asked who they were for, he'd gone pale, stammered something about a colleague's kid, and quickly changed the subject. I'd thought it was strange at the time, but I'd learned not to push, not to question the adults in my life. Now looking back with adult eyes, I wondered what other secrets he'd been keeping even then. By the time I graduated high school, I'd fully internalized my role in the family ecosystem. I was the reliable one, the responsible one, the one who could be called upon in emergencies. When Mom needed someone to co-sign for a car loan because her credit wasn't good enough, I did it at 23. When Dad's business hit a rough patch and they couldn't make mortgage payments, I quietly transferred money from my savings account money I'd been setting aside for graduate school. When Emma needed tuition help, needed rent money, needed funds for yet another failed business venture, I wrote the checks without complaint. I told myself it was what families did. We supported each other. We sacrificed for those we loved. But the support only flowed in one direction, didn't it? When I'd struggled to make rent during my first year out of college, living in an expensive city on an entry-level salary, I'd called home asking for a small loan. Mom had launched into a lecture about financial responsibility and living within my means. Dad had said he'd think about it and never mentioned it again. I'd eaten ramen for 3 months and worked weekend shifts at a coffee shop to make ends meet. Meanwhile, to everyone outside our house, we were the picture-perfect American family. At church every Sunday, sitting in the third pew on the left, all of us dressed immaculately and smiling. Dad served on the finance committee. Mom led the women's auxiliary. We volunteered together at the annual Christmas charity drive, posed for photos at community events, and were held up as an example of strong family values. The neighbors loved us. Mrs. Patterson next door would often comment on how lucky my parents were to have such devoted daughters. Father Tom at St. Catherine's would praise our family unity during his sermons, sometimes using us as an unnamed example of how families should function. None of them knew that the smiling daughter in those church pews went home to a mother who critiqued everything from her weight to her career choices to her inability to find a husband. None of them saw the financial ledger of one-sided support, the emotional bank account perpetually overdrawn. None of them understood that I'd been slowly erased from this family long before they drugged me and stole my credit card. I'd been their resource, their safety net, their convenient solution to every problem. But I'd never been their daughter. Not really. Not the way Emma was. And now they'd taken the last thing I had to give. I looked around the empty house at the walls that held decades of painful memories disguised as normal family life, and something hardened inside my chest. Their perfect story ends tonight. The anger that had been building gave way to something colder, sharper, more useful. I grabbed my laptop from my bedroom and returned to the kitchen table, powering it up with hands that had stopped shaking. Years of working as a financial analyst had taught me one fundamental truth. Money always leaves a trail, and trails can be followed, documented, and used as evidence. I logged into my credit card account and downloaded every transaction from the past 72 hours into a spreadsheet. The charges appeared in chronological order, and as I studied them, a picture emerged that was even more calculated than I'd initially realized. The first transaction had processed at exactly 3:47 in the morning. $12,000 to Silverstone Resort and Spa in Napa Valley for venue rental and catering services. 7 minutes later, $3,500 to Wellington Wedding Services, a high-end wedding planning company. At 4:02 a.m., $2,800 to Premier Transportation Services for luxury vehicle rentals. Then came smaller charges, floral arrangements, photography packages, a makeup artist hairstyling services. But one charge stood out as peculiar. $1,700 to VIP coordination and events processed at 4:23 in the morning. The description simply read, Private Car Service Executive Transportation. That amount seemed excessive for simple wedding day transportation, especially since they'd already paid for luxury vehicle rentals. I made a note to investigate that charge specifically. Something about it felt wrong, separate from the wedding expenses somehow. I created a second spreadsheet, this one documenting everything I could remember from last night. The time I'd arrived home from work. The special dinner Mom had insisted on making. The wine she'd poured for me, refilling my glass twice when I wasn't paying attention. How unusually tired I'd felt after the meal. Dad's silence throughout dinner, his inability to meet my eyes. The last thing I remembered was sitting on the couch around 9:30 feeling like I needed to lie down for just a minute. Then nothing until I'd woken up hours later alone. I pulled up our home security system on my laptop. Dad had installed cameras 3 years ago after a series of break-ins in the neighborhood, and I'd helped him set up the digital recording system since he wasn't particularly tech-savvy. The system stored footage for 30 days on a cloud server. I navigated to last night's recordings and began scanning through the timestamps. Everything appeared normal until 2:58 a.m. At that exact moment, every camera in the house went dark simultaneously. Not the fuzzy darkness of nighttime recording, but the complete black of a system that had been manually disabled. I checked the system logs and found the shutdown command had been entered using Mom's access code at 2:58 and 17 seconds. The cameras remained off for 43 minutes. At 3:41 a.m., they came back online, and by then the house was empty. I was visible on the living room camera, unconscious on the couch, completely alone. Whatever had happened during those 43 minutes had been deliberately hidden from the security system. But they'd made a mistake. The system had logged the manual override. It had recorded the exact access code used and the timestamp. They'd created a digital fingerprint of their own guilt. I scrolled back further through the recordings, focusing on the hours before the cameras were disabled. At 11:43 p.m., my bedroom door opened. The hallway camera showed my mother entering, standing in the doorway for approximately 90 seconds, then leaving. At 2:15 a.m., the door opened again. This time it was Dad also pausing in the doorway before withdrawing. At 2:52 a.m., both parents entered together, remained for 3 minutes, then left and headed downstairs. They'd been checking on me, making sure I was still unconscious, monitoring their victim. I picked up my phone and called Mrs. Patterson next door. She answered on the third ring, her elderly voice warm with concern when she recognized my number. "Danielle, dear, are you all right? I saw your family leave very early this morning. I hope nothing's wrong." I forced my voice to remain calm and casual. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Patterson. I'm actually trying to figure out what time they left. I was so exhausted I slept through their departure. Did you happen to notice?" "Oh, it must have been around 2:30 in the morning. I was up with my insomnia looking out the window when I saw them loading the car. Your father was carrying luggage and your mother had that wooden box, you know, the pretty one that usually sits in your living room. Your grandmother's memory chest, isn't it? I thought it was odd they were bringing that to a wedding, but perhaps it has sentimental value." My stomach dropped. Grandma's memory box. The one that contained her journals, old family photographs, and documents related to the trust fund she'd established before she died. The box I'd been meaning to go through properly but had never found the time. They'd taken it with them, which meant there was something inside they needed, or something they wanted to keep me from finding. "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. That helps me remember now. I appreciate it." I ended the call and immediately contacted my credit card company through their fraud department hotline. The representative who answered was professional and efficient as I explained the situation. Yes, I confirmed these were all fraudulent charges. No, I had not authorized any of them. Yes, I could provide documentation that I was home and unconscious during the time the charges were processed. I requested an immediate freeze on the account and initiated a fraud investigation for every single transaction from the past 24 hours. The representative assured me the charges would be disputed and the account locked within the hour. Any pending transactions would be declined. I requested written confirmation of everything we'd discussed along with a case number for my records. Next, I logged into my bank accounts and changed every password, every security question, every piece of access information. I enabled two-factor authentication on everything. I checked my other credit cards and found them untouched, so I froze those accounts as well, just as a precaution. I wasn't leaving anything to chance. As I worked through each security measure, each documentation step, each protective action, I felt the shift happening inside me. I wasn't the hurt daughter anymore, wasn't the victim lying unconscious while her family robbed her. I was becoming something else, something harder, something they would never see coming. I was a financial analyst who understood how to track money and build cases from data. I had evidence. I had documentation. I had timestamps and transaction records and security logs. I had a neighbor who'd witnessed their 3 a.m. departure with property that wasn't theirs to take. They thought they'd won by getting away before I could stop them. They thought the wedding would proceed as planned, funded by my stolen money, and I'd be too ashamed or too conditioned to make waves. They'd miscalculated, let the first domino fall. With the immediate financial damage contained, I sat back and forced myself to take 3 deep breaths. My hands were trembling again, but this time from adrenaline rather than shock. I needed to think clearly strategically without letting rage cloud my judgment. What I needed right now was someone who could help me think like a lawyer instead of a wounded daughter. I scrolled through my contacts and found the name I was looking for, Laura Chen. We'd been roommates at Berkeley, stayed close through the years, even as our careers took us in different directions. She'd gone to law school while I'd pursued finance, and now she worked as a financial crimes attorney in San Francisco, specializing in cases of fraud and embezzlement. If anyone could help me navigate this nightmare, it was Laura. She answered on the second ring, her voice bright with surprise. "Danny, hey, I was just thinking about you. How's the wedding prep going?" "Laura, I need your help, professional help." My voice cracked slightly on the last word and I hated myself for it. Her tone shifted immediately, all business now. "What happened?" I told her everything. The dinner, the wine, waking up alone with a needle mark in my arm. The $20,000 in fraudulent charges. The disabled security cameras. The stolen memory box. As I spoke, I could hear her typing on the other end, taking notes the way she always did during important conversations. When I finished, there was a long silence before she spoke. "Danny, this isn't just theft. The injection mark suggests assault, possibly even attempted harm. We need to treat this as a potential criminal conspiracy, not just a family dispute." Hearing it laid out in legal terms made something settle inside me. This was real. This was serious. This wasn't me being oversensitive or dramatic the way my mother had always accused me of being when I complained about their treatment. "What do I do?" I asked. "First rule," Laura said firmly, "breathe. I know you're furious. You have every right to be. But from this moment forward, every single action you take needs to be calculated, documented, and completely legal. Emotion is your enemy right now. We're going to build a case so airtight they won't be able to talk their way out of it, but that requires patience and precision. Can you do that?" I thought about the years I'd spent swallowing my anger, biting my tongue, being the reasonable one while they took and took and took. Maybe all that practice at controlling my emotions was about to pay off in a way none of us had anticipated. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." "Good. Here's what we do immediately. That injection mark is evidence of assault. You need medical documentation right now, today, before it fades. Go to an emergency room. Tell them you woke up with an unexplained injection mark and symptoms of having been drugged. Ask them to run a full toxicology panel. Get copies of everything for your records." I grabbed a pen and started writing down her instructions on the back of one of my bank statements. "Next," she continued, "photograph everything. The injection site from multiple angles with your phone's timestamp and location services turned on. The wine glass, don't touch it, just photograph it. Take pictures of every empty room showing your family cleared out. Download those security system logs to a separate hard drive, not just the cloud. Get everything you can that proves what happened and when." "Already started on the security footage," I said. "I have the logs showing the cameras were manually disabled using Mom's access code." "Perfect. That's premeditation right there. Now I want you to start a document, a detailed timeline of everything you remember from yesterday evening forward. Every interaction, every conversation, what time things happened, who said what. Include context too. Family history, past financial interactions. Anything that establishes a pattern of exploitation. Think of it as building a narrative that a jury would understand." I opened a new document on my laptop and titled it Evidence Log. The cursor blinked at me, waiting. "Laura, they took Grandma's memory box. The one with all her papers and journals." Another pause. "That suggests they needed something in it, or they're trying to keep you from finding something." Do you know what was in there? Not entirely. I know there were documents related to her trust fund, the one she set up for me. Old family photos. Her journals from the last few years before she died. I never went through it properly after the funeral. I kept meaning to, but you were too busy being their personal ATM, Laura finished bluntly. Okay, that's a lead we'll follow. For now, focus on what you can document today. Medical evidence, first photographs, second written timeline, third. I'm going to do some research on California laws regarding drugging and financial exploitation. This weekend I'm coming down there and we're going to plan this out properly. You don't have to do that, I started to say, but she cut me off. Danny, you're my friend and what they did to you is unconscionable. Plus, this is exactly the kind of case I went to law school to handle. People who abuse positions of family trust make me furious, and I'm very good at making them pay for it. So yes, I'm coming down and we're going to make sure they face consequences. Real ones. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot of isolation I hadn't even realized was there. I wasn't alone in this. I had an ally who believed me, who saw the crime for what it was, who had the expertise to help me fight back effectively. Thank you, I whispered. Don't thank me yet. Thank me when we win. And we will win, Danny. Not quickly, not loudly, but completely. Remember patience and precision. Document everything. Control your emotions. Let them think they got away with it while we build the case that destroys them. After we hung up, I sat for a moment letting her words sink in. Then I picked up my phone and took 23 photographs of the injection mark from different angles and lighting conditions. I photographed the wine glass, the empty rooms, the security system control panel. I backed up the camera logs to 3 different locations. I began typing out everything I could remember, every detail, no matter how small, building a timeline that would eventually become their downfall. This was how you fought back. Not with screaming or tears or desperate confrontations. With evidence. With documentation. With the slow, methodical building of an unassailable case. We win slow, then all at once. I was at the emergency room getting my blood drawn when my phone started buzzing with notifications. The nurse had just finished labeling the vials for the toxicology panel when I glanced at the screen and saw a string of messages from numbers I didn't recognize. Then came a notification from my credit card company confirming that all disputed charges had been frozen pending investigation and that merchants had been notified of the fraud claim. The timing, I realized with cold satisfaction, must have been catastrophic for them. I waited until the doctor finished examining the injection site and writing up his report before checking my phone properly. There were 3 voicemails, 2 from the Silverstone Resort and 1 from a number with a Napa area code. I listened to the resort message first. Ms. Carter, this is Jennifer Wu, Events Coordinator at Silverstone Resort. We've received notification from your credit card company that the charges for the Carter-Wilson wedding have been disputed as fraudulent. We need to speak with you immediately regarding payment arrangements as the ceremony is scheduled to begin in less than 3 hours. Please call us back at your earliest convenience. The second message was from the same woman, but her tone had shifted from professional concern to barely controlled panic. Ms. Carter, this is Jennifer Wu again. We've been unable to reach your family members on site, and without confirmed payment, we cannot proceed with the reception service. Please contact us urgently. The third message was from someone identifying himself as the resort manager, informing me that they had been forced to suspend all wedding services until the payment issue could be resolved, and that if I had any information about the situation, they would appreciate my immediate response. I deleted all 3 messages without calling back. Over the next 2 hours, as I waited for my test results and collected copies of all my medical documentation, my phone continued to buzz intermittently. I ignored it, focusing instead on making sure every piece of evidence was properly documented and stored. The doctor confirmed that my symptoms were consistent with having been administered a sedative possibly combined with other substances, and noted the injection site appeared to be from a hypodermic needle. Everything went into my growing file of evidence. It wasn't until I was driving home that I finally allowed myself to check social media. What I found there exceeded even my expectations. Someone had filmed my mother in the resort's business office, and the video was already spreading through local Napa Valley community groups. In the shaky phone footage, Mom stood in front of a desk, her face contorted with rage, her voice shrill and carrying clearly on the recording. "This is absolutely unacceptable. Do you know who we are? We've paid for this wedding. My daughter's special day is being ruined because of your incompetence." She was jabbing her finger at a young woman in a resort uniform who stood behind the desk, looking simultaneously frightened and exhausted. The employee's calm, professional response was barely audible. "Ma'am, we've explained that the credit card charges have been reported as fraudulent until we receive alternative payment." Fraudulent. How dare you? My daughter authorized that card. She's just being vindictive because she wasn't invited. This is family business and you have no right to interfere with— "Ma'am, I need you to lower your voice. Other guests." "I will not lower my voice. You're destroying my daughter's wedding. What kind of establishment treats paying customers this way?" The video cut off there, but the damage was done. The comments section beneath the post was filling rapidly with local residents expressing shock and sympathy for the resort staff. Someone had recognized my mother from church activities and mentioned our family by name. Others chimed in with their own stories of entitled wedding parties. A few people pointed out that if the charges were actually disputed as fraudulent, the resort had every legal right to suspend services. I watched the video 3 times, studying my mother's face, the way her mask of gracious perfection had crumbled to reveal the entitled fury beneath. This was the woman I'd known my whole life, the one who existed behind closed doors, now exposed for strangers to see and judge. My phone rang, Emma's name flashing on the screen. I considered letting it go to voicemail, but curiosity won out. I answered without saying anything. "Danielle?" Emma's voice came through in a wail of anguish. "What did you do? What did you do? My wedding is ruined. Everything is falling apart. The resort won't let us use any of the facilities. Half the guests are leaving. The photographer is demanding cash payment up front. And Mom is having a complete breakdown. How could you do this to me? How could you destroy my wedding day?" I let her cry and rage for a full 30 seconds before I spoke, my voice perfectly calm and cold. "I didn't destroy your wedding day, Emma. You did. The moment you let them drug me and steal from me to pay for a party you couldn't afford." "I didn't know, I swear I didn't know about any of that. Mom said you'd sent the money as a gift, that you couldn't come because of work but wanted to contribute. I thought—" "You thought what? That I'd willingly give you $20,000? When have I ever had that kind of money to just give away? When have any of you ever cared whether I could afford the things you demanded from me? Please, Danny, please fix this. Call the credit card company back. Tell them it was a mistake. The ceremony is supposed to start in an hour and everything is falling apart and everyone is staring at us and I can't. No." The single word dropped into the conversation like a stone into still water. "What?" I said, "No, Emma. I'm not fixing this. I'm not saving you. Not this time. You want someone to blame for your ruined wedding? Look at the people who drugged their own daughter and robbed her blind. Look in the mirror at the person who never once questioned where that money came from. But don't look at me. I'm done being your family's emergency fund." I ended the call and blocked her number. For the rest of the evening, I watched from a distance as the catastrophe unfolded through social media posts and messages from mutual acquaintances. The wedding ceremony had been performed in a small garden area with only immediate family present, but the reception had been canceled entirely. Guests who'd traveled to Napa for the celebration found themselves with nothing to celebrate. The photographer, the DJ, the florist all demanded payment up front before providing services, and my family couldn't produce it. Emma's perfect day had become a public humiliation, a cautionary tale already being whispered about in our hometown and throughout the Napa Valley service industry. And the bill keeps coming. 3 days after the wedding disaster, a delivery truck pulled up to my house with a large package. The return address showed it came from Silverstone Resort's lost and found apartment. I signed for it with my heart hammering in my chest, already knowing what it had to be. Grandma's memory box. According to the note attached, the box had been found abandoned in the bridal suite after my family's hasty departure. Since my name was on file as the credit card holder, the resort had shipped it directly to me. I carried it inside with reverent hands. This wooden chest that had sat in our living room for as long as I could remember passed down from my grandmother when she died 5 years ago. I set it on my kitchen table and just stared at it for a long moment. The box was beautiful hand-carved walnut, with intricate floral patterns along the edges, the kind of craftsmanship you didn't see anymore. My grandmother had kept it on her mantel, and after her death, it had migrated to our house where it became just another piece of furniture, barely noticed despite its beauty. Inside, I found the items I expected: old family photographs showing my grandparents in their youth, my mother as a little girl, holidays and celebrations frozen in fading color. There were my grandmother's reading glasses still in their embroidered case, a small collection of costume jewelry pieces she'd worn to church. And beneath it all, carefully folded, was her quilt, the masterpiece she'd worked on for the last decade of her life. But sitting on top of the quilt was something I'd never seen before: a cream-colored envelope with my name written across it in my grandmother's elegant script. Beneath my name she'd written, "Open when they show you who they really are." My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a handwritten journal, pages and pages in my grandmother's meticulous handwriting, each entry dated and documented with the precision of an accountant. The first entry was dated nearly 15 years ago, just after she'd established the trust fund that was supposed to secure my future. June 2019. The first entry read, "Trust withdrawal $15,000, stated purpose, Emma's college tuition. Called Emma's university bursar actual tuition after scholarships $3,000. Remainder $12,000 unaccounted for. Asked Emily where money went. She became defensive, accused me of not trusting her judgment. Conversation ended badly." I flipped through page after page, each one documenting a similar pattern. December 2021. $8,000 withdrawn for Emma's car, but DMV records showed the vehicle purchased for $4,200. March 2023. $12,000 for Emma's business venture, but Emma's business bank account showed 0 deposits from family sources. My grandmother had been investigating, cross-referencing, documenting every discrepancy with the thoroughness of a forensic accountant. But it wasn't just about Emma. There were entries about me too, and these made my throat tight with unshed tears. August 2018. Emily promised Danny $5,000 graduation gift from trust. I wrote the check. Bank records show Emily cashed it. Danny received $500 and a card saying, "This is all we could afford right now." Where did the other $500 go? November 2020. Danny called asking if I could help with down payment on apartment. $10,000. Before I could send it, Emily called me, said Danny was being irresponsible with money, and I shouldn't enable her. I trusted Emily's judgment, refused Danny's request. Later learned Danny worked 3 jobs to cover expenses, while Emily and Robert bought new furniture. I failed my granddaughter. That last line broke something in me. My grandmother had known. She'd seen what was happening and had tried to protect me even when she'd been manipulated into working against me. The final entry was dated 1 week before her death. They won't stop. The pattern is too established, the entitlement too deep. I've done what I can while alive. Now I do what I must for after. Protective measures established with Attorney Morrison. Danny will have what she needs when she needs it. They've shown me who they are. Soon they'll show her too. Attached to the journal with a paperclip was a legal document on official letterhead from Morrison and Associates estate planning attorneys. I read it twice to make sure I understood what I was seeing. The trust fund my grandmother had established, worth approximately $1.2 million and supposed to be distributed gradually under my parents' management until I turned 40, had been restructured 3 months before her death. The new terms included a protection clause I'd never known existed. The language was precise and unambiguous. In the event that Danielle Carter becomes subject to financial exploitation, including, but not limited to unauthorized use of credit or bank accounts, coerced financial transfers, deception regarding financial transactions, or taking advantage of an incapacitated person's resources. Full control of this trust shall immediately transfer to Danielle Carter exclusively. All other named beneficiaries shall forfeit any and all inheritance rights permanently and irrevocably. The document went on to specify exactly what constituted financial exploitation, and the definitions matched what had just happened to me with eerie precision. It was as if my grandmother had written this clause anticipating the exact crime my family would eventually commit. Tucked inside the legal document was a handwritten note on my grandmother's personal stationery. "My dearest Danny, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and I suspect your mother has finally shown her true colors. I've watched her take from you for years, watched her mold Emma into a golden child while making you into a workhorse. I've watched your father retreat into silence rather than stand up for what's right. I confronted them about the missing money, but they're very good at explaining things away, at making me doubt what I could clearly see in the numbers. So I stopped confronting and started documenting. This journal is years of evidence that will hold up in any court. The trust is now yours, and yours alone. They can't touch it. They can't manipulate it. They can't take it from you the way they've taken so much else. Use it wisely. Use it to build a life free from their control. Justice tastes better. Warm, not hot. Be patient. Be thorough and be free. You were always my favorite sweet girl, because you had a good heart. They couldn't corrupt. I'm so sorry I couldn't protect you while I lived. But I can protect you now. All my love, Grandma." I sat at my kitchen table surrounded by the evidence of my grandmother's love and foresight, and for the first time since waking up 3 days ago, I cried. Not from grief or anger, but from the overwhelming feeling of being seen, being believed, being protected by someone who'd loved me enough to arm me from beyond death. Grandma was watching from the grave. Armed with my grandmother's evidence, I began digging deeper into the wedding expenses, but I needed more current information about what Emma actually knew. Something about her phone call after the wedding disaster nagged at me, the genuine confusion in her voice when she said Mom had told her I'd sent the money as a gift. I went back through my blocked messages, curious about what I'd missed in my initial rage. Emma's texts told a different story than my mother's. Where Mom's messages had been accusatory and demanding, "Fix this now," and "How dare you embarrass this family," Emma's were bewildered and almost pleading. "Danny, please call me. I don't understand what's happening." Another one sent 2 hours later, "Mom says you're trying to ruin my wedding, but that doesn't sound like you. You've never been cruel." And finally, "Did something happen? Are you okay? This doesn't make sense." I stared at those messages for a long time, trying to reconcile them with what I knew. Either Emma was a skilled manipulator playing the innocent card, or she genuinely hadn't known about the theft. I reached out to Sarah, the mutual friend who'd been a bridesmaid, and asked if she could send me any screenshots of conversations with Emma from the days leading up to the wedding. What Sarah sent me shifted something in my understanding. In a group chat with other bridesmaids, Emma had written, "I'm so grateful Danny is covering the venue costs even though she can't be here. Mom said she insisted on it as her gift since work kept her away. I wish she could have taken time off, but I understand. Her job is demanding and she's always been the responsible one." The words felt genuine, not calculated. Emma actually believed I'd willingly sent the money that I'd chosen work over her wedding, that this was my generous gift to her. Mom had constructed an entire narrative, and Emma had accepted it without question, because why would her mother lie? I felt my anger toward Emma begin to crack, replaced by something more complicated. My little sister wasn't evil. She was naive, sheltered, trained from birth to accept whatever our parents told her without critical examination. She'd been the golden child, yes, but maybe that gilded cage had its own kind of damage. Still, I needed to understand the full scope of what had happened, which meant following the money trail more carefully. I pulled up the bank statements my grandmother had referenced in her ledger, going back not just months, but years. That's when I noticed something I'd somehow overlooked before a recurring monthly transfer of exactly $2,000 from Dad's checking account to an external account registered under the name L. Green. The transfers went back 12 years, appearing like clockwork on the 15th of every month. I'd helped Dad organize his tax documents for years, had access to most of his financial records, and I'd always assumed this was a business expense or loan payment. But now, looking at it with suspicious eyes, I realized there was no corresponding loan paperwork, no business contract, nothing that explained this consistent obligation. I searched every database I could access for L. Green in connection with Dad's consulting business. Nothing. No employee by that name, no vendor, no client. Just a name attached to a bank account that had been receiving $2,000 every single month for over a decade. What made it even more suspicious was that 7 years ago the amount had increased from $1,500 to $2,000. Whatever this was, it had grown more expensive over time. The pattern suggested something ongoing, something obligatory, something Dad had hidden from everyone, even from the tax documents I'd helped him prepare. Had he been lying on his taxes? Was this blackmail? Or was it something else entirely? I called Laura and asked her to make a legal inquiry with the resort about the specific services charged to my card. 2 days later, she sent me a PDF of the service contract for VIP coordination and events. As I read through it, my blood ran cold. The $1,700 charge wasn't for Emma's wedding transportation at all. It was for private executive car service for Mr. Robert Carter pickup at Silverstone Resort, 2:00 p.m., destination 580 California Street. San Francisco return pickup, 5:00 p.m. I Googled the address. It was a major bank's private wealth management office in the financial district. My father had left his daughter's wedding ceremony to meet with a bank. Not just stepped away for a phone call, but arranged and paid for expensive private transportation to San Francisco, scheduled to depart right when the ceremony was ending, and return just as the reception was winding down. He would miss the speeches, the first dance, the cake cutting, all the moments a father was supposed to be present for. What kind of banking business was so urgent it couldn't wait one day? What kind of meeting required a 200-mile round trip on your daughter's wedding day? I cross-referenced the date with Dad's regular account statements. On the day of Emma's wedding, there were no large deposits or withdrawals from his primary accounts. Whatever happened at that bank meeting, it wasn't about his normal finances. It was something separate, something secret, possibly something connected to the mysterious L. Green. I looked at the security footage again from the night they drugged me, focusing on Dad's movements. He'd been quiet during dinner, yes, but I'd attributed that to his usual emotional distance. Now I saw it differently. He'd excused himself twice, once before dinner to make a business call, and once after, ostensibly to check something in the garage. Both times he'd been gone longer than necessary. Both times he'd returned looking tense, preoccupied. Mom might have been the one who disabled the cameras and poured the wine, the visible orchestrator of my drugging and robbery. But every financial thread I followed led back to Dad. The mysterious monthly payments, the secret bank meeting, the years of careful documentation in my grandmother's ledger showing money systematically diverted from where it was supposed to go. Dad wasn't the silent, passive enabler I'd always thought he was. He was the architect hiding behind Mom's loud, demanding presence. She was the distraction, the spectacle that drew everyone's attention while he worked quietly in the shadows, moving money, managing secrets, orchestrating a scheme far more complex than a simple stolen credit card. Emma was the stage. Dad was the show. The hospital called 4 days after my initial visit, asking me to come back in to discuss my toxicology results. The nurse on the phone had been carefully neutral, but something in her tone made my stomach knot with anxiety. I arrived at the emergency department 20 minutes later and was shown directly to a private consultation room, which only heightened my concern. Dr. Sarah Patel entered with a manila folder and a grave expression that told me everything before she even spoke. She sat down across from me and folded her hands on the table. "Ms. Carter, I need you to understand the seriousness of what I'm about to tell you. Your toxicology panel came back with results that are deeply concerning. She opened the folder and turned it so I could see the lab report, though the medical terminology meant little to me. Your blood work shows significantly elevated levels of insulin far beyond what would occur naturally in the human body, especially for someone who isn't diabetic and hasn't been prescribed insulin. What does that mean? I asked, though part of me already knew. It means someone administered a large dose of insulin to you, likely through injection. The level we detected would typically cause severe hypoglycemia, dangerously low blood sugar. In most cases, this would lead to seizures, loss of consciousness, coma, and potentially death. She paused, letting that sink in. Ms. Carter, the only reason you're sitting here today is because you have an unusually robust physiological response. Your body fought back harder than most would. Also, based on your symptoms when you first came in, I believe you may have vomited shortly after the injection, which would have helped expel some of the substance before full absorption. The room felt like it was tilting. Are you saying someone tried to kill me? Dr. Patel's expression was somber and certain. Combined with the injection mark you showed us, and your account of being unconscious for many hours. Yes. This was not accidental. Someone deliberately administered a potentially lethal dose of insulin. I'm required by law to report this to the police, and I strongly recommend you do the same. Do you have any idea who might have done this to you? I thought of my parents loading their car at 2:30 in the morning of my mother's access code, disabling the security cameras of the wine she'd insisted I drink. Yes, I whispered. I know exactly who did this. I left the hospital with copies of my medical records and a referral to speak with a detective. But first I needed to find the evidence that would prove what had been done to me. I drove home with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly, my knuckles turned white, trying to process the magnitude of what I'd just learned. They hadn't just robbed me. They'd tried to murder me. At home, I pulled on latex gloves from the box under my kitchen sink and began a methodical search of the house. I started in the bathroom, going through the trash can beneath the sink. Buried under tissues, cotton swabs, and other debris, I found an empty insulin vial, the kind that comes from a pharmacy. The label was still attached, printed with clear information. Patient name, Emily Carter. Medication, insulin Lispro. Quantity 1 vial. Fill date 2 days before the wedding. My mother wasn't diabetic. She'd never been prescribed insulin. There was no legitimate reason for this medication to be in our house, and certainly no reason for the empty vial to be hidden in the bathroom trash. I placed the vial carefully into a sealed plastic evidence bag, photographed it from every angle, and added it to my growing collection of documentation. Then I moved to the family computer in the den, the desktop machine we'd all shared for years. I knew the password because I'd set it up for my parents, and they'd never changed it. I opened the browser history and filtered by date going back to the week before the wedding. What I found made my blood run cold. 3 days before they drugged me, someone using my father's login profile had searched, "How much insulin is lethal for average adult?" 15 minutes later, insulin overdose symptoms timeline. Then, can insulin poisoning be detected in autopsy? And finally, insulin death ruled natural causes, how common? The searches were clinical, methodical research conducted by someone planning a murder and trying to ensure it would go undetected. I took screenshots of everything, my hands shaking so badly I had to steady the mouse with both hands. I pulled up my grandmother's trust documents again, this time reading the succession clause with new, horrified understanding. In the event of my death without spouse or children, the trust would revert to my parents' control with a portion allocated for Emma's benefit. $1.2 million freed from the protective clauses my grandmother had so carefully constructed, available for them to access without restriction. The timeline crystallized with sickening clarity. They'd researched how to kill me with insulin 3 days before the wedding. They'd filled a prescription for insulin under my mother's name 2 days before. The night before the wedding, they'd drugged me, injected me with what should have been a lethal dose, and left me alone while they established their alibis 200 miles away in Napa Valley. If I had died as planned, my body wouldn't have been discovered until they returned from the wedding, at which point the insulin would have been metabolized enough that an autopsy might have missed it entirely, especially if the medical examiner wasn't looking for it. With dozens of wedding guests as witnesses to their presence in Napa, they'd have perfect alibis. It would have looked like a tragic accident, perhaps a medical event no one could have predicted. A devastated family losing their daughter while celebrating their other daughter's wedding. The credit card theft suddenly made terrible sense in this context. It wasn't the main crime, it was insurance. If I somehow survived, they'd already have $20,000 and be gone. If I died as planned, well, the credit card charges would seem like a minor footnote to the tragedy barely worth investigating when weighed against a family's grief. They'd stolen my money as a backup plan, never expecting it to matter because they never expected me to wake up. I sat in that den surrounded by evidence of premeditated murder and felt something inside me turn to ice. This wasn't about family dysfunction anymore. This wasn't about financial abuse or golden children versus scapegoats. This was about parents who had decided their daughter was worth more to them dead than alive, who had planned and researched and executed an attempt on her life with the same careful attention to detail they'd bring to planning a vacation. They didn't drug me to sleep. They drugged me to never wake up. The discovery that my parents had tried to kill me could have sent me into a spiral of rage and recklessness. But Laura's words echoed in my mind, patience and precision. I had evidence of attempted murder, but I needed to understand the full scope of their conspiracy before bringing everything to the authorities. That meant gathering intelligence, and I'd learned from years of financial analysis that the best information often came from unexpected sources. I started with the neighbors, people who'd watched our family for decades and had formed their own quiet opinions about us. Mrs. Patterson was my first target, not because she was vulnerable, but because she was observant in the way elderly insomniacs often are. I showed up at her door on a Thursday morning with fresh muffins from the bakery she loved and offered to help with her grocery shopping. As we drove to the store, I kept the conversation light, letting her talk about her garden and her grandchildren. It wasn't until we were unloading bags in her kitchen that I casually mentioned I was organizing some family financial documents and trying to reconstruct Dad's business timeline. "Oh, speaking of your father's business, Mrs.," Patterson said, arranging canned goods in her pantry. "There was a woman who came to see him a few weeks back. Very professional looking, carrying one of those expensive leather briefcases. I remember because it was unusual. Your father doesn't usually have business meetings at home, does he?" "When was this?" I asked, keeping my tone merely curious. "Let me think. It must have been about 3 weeks before Emma's wedding, maybe a bit more. She arrived around 10 in the morning and didn't leave until after 2. I noticed because I was weeding my front flower bed. Your mother came home partway through the meeting, and oh my, the look on her face when she saw that woman's car in the driveway. She rushed inside, and not 20 minutes later the woman left in quite a hurry." I filed this information away and thanked Mrs. Patterson, making a mental note 3 weeks before the wedding mystery woman mother upset. It aligned with other pieces of the puzzle I was assembling. My next stop was Mr. Rodriguez, the retired police officer who lived across the street. He was outside washing his car when I walked over, and we chatted about the neighborhood watch program he coordinated. Eventually, I steered the conversation toward my father. "Has Dad seemed stressed lately?" I asked. "I've been worried about him." Mr. Rodriguez paused, sponge dripping in his hand. "You know, I have noticed something odd. Several times over the past few months, late at night, I've seen your father sitting in his car in the driveway talking on his phone, sometimes for an hour or more. Always looked tense, animated, like he was arguing with someone. I figured it was work stress, but it seemed like he didn't want anyone in the house to hear those conversations." That Sunday, I forced myself to attend church for the first time since the wedding disaster. Walking into St. Catherine's felt like entering enemy territory. I could feel eyes on me, whispers following my path down the aisle. But I held my head high and sat in a pew near the back, projecting a calm I didn't entirely feel. After the service, several women from the auxiliary approached me with carefully concerned expressions. They asked vague questions about the situation, clearly having heard some version of what happened in Napa. I responded with practiced grace, explaining only that there were some family financial matters being resolved, and thanking them for their prayers and support. It was in the fellowship hall over weak coffee and store-bought cookies that Mrs. DeLuca pulled me aside. She was a woman in her 70s who'd run the auxiliary's charitable programs for as long as I could remember, and she had the sharp eyes of someone who'd seen every con and scheme in the book. "Danielle, dear, I need to talk to you about something that's been troubling me," she said quietly, guiding me to a corner away from the other parishioners. "Your mother came to us 3 months ago asking for help from our emergency assistance fund. She said Emma's future in-laws had fallen on hard times, and the young couple needed financial support for the wedding. She was very convincing, very emotional. Said it would break Emma's heart to have a small ceremony after all her dreams of something special." My chest tightened. "How much did you give her?" $3,500. We held a special collection, explained to the congregation that we were helping a young couple from our church community start their lives together. People were generous. Mrs. DeLuca's expression hardened. "But then I saw the photos from Emma's wedding on Facebook. Danielle, that wasn't a modest ceremony funded by a struggling family. That was an expensive, lavish affair. And from what I understand, there were significant problems with payment at the venue." "The money didn't go to Emma," I said quietly. "I don't think Emma even knew about it." Mrs. DeLuca nodded slowly. "I suspected as much. Your mother has approached us before over the years for various causes. I never questioned it because we're supposed to help our community members in need, but now I'm wondering how much of what she told us was true." I thanked her for her honesty and promised to let her know if there was anything the auxiliary needed to do to address the situation. As I left the church, I felt the weight of another piece falling into place. That evening, I met with Laura at a coffee shop halfway between our cities. I spread out my notes on a corner table, and we began constructing a timeline on her laptop. 3 months before the wedding, Mom solicits $3,500 from the church, I said. 3 weeks before, a mystery woman meets with Dad for hours and Mom is furious. 2 weeks before, they fill a prescription for insulin. 1 week before, there are unusual withdrawals and transfers. Then the wedding funded by my stolen credit card and credit they couldn't actually afford. "This wasn't impulsive," Laura said, typing rapidly. "This was planned over months. The question is, what triggered it? Why did they suddenly need so much money so quickly that they were willing to commit fraud, theft, and attempted murder?" "Elle Green," I said. "Whatever Dad's been paying $2,000 a month for 12 years, that's the key. That's what this is really about." Laura nodded. "We could hire a private investigator to track the account, but that takes time and money. Is there anyone who might already know who Elle Green is?" I thought about my grandmother's letter about Attorney Morrison, who'd helped her restructure the trust. "My grandmother's lawyer. He handled some of Dad's business stuff years ago. If there's a paper trail, he might know where to find it." "Can you get an appointment?" "I'll call tomorrow." As I drove home that night, I thought about the information I'd gathered through simple acts of kindness and patience. Helping an elderly neighbor with groceries, attending church, having quiet conversations over coffee. Each small interaction had yielded pieces of truth that my family had worked so hard to hide. Every kindness bought me truth. Laura arrived at my house the following Saturday with her laptop, a portable scanner, and a determination that matched my own. We spent the entire day in my dining room organizing every piece of evidence into a comprehensive report for the Internal Revenue Service. The document we created was 47 pages long, meticulously footnoted with exhibits that included bank statements, my grandmother's handwritten ledger, photographs of the trust fund documents, and a detailed timeline of financial irregularities spanning 7 years. The report outlined 3 primary areas of concern. First, the trust fund withdrawals that my grandmother had documented, nearly $100,000 taken supposedly for Emma's benefit, with only a fraction actually reaching her. These withdrawals had never been reported as income by my parents, despite the fact that they'd diverted the majority of the money into their personal accounts. Second, the church auxiliary donations solicited under false pretenses. My mother had claimed the money was for charitable purposes, helping Emma and her fiancé, but had instead used it for personal expenses, potentially claiming those donations as tax deductions while pocketing the funds. Third, the mysterious monthly payments to L. Green $2,000 every month for 12 years, totaling nearly $300,000 over time, with no corresponding documentation in any tax filing, no explanation of the purpose, and no reporting of whatever service or product this money was supposedly purchasing. Laura walked me through each section, explaining how the IRS would view these discrepancies. Tax fraud is one of the few crimes where the burden of proof shifts significantly, she said. Once the IRS identifies irregularities, your parents will have to prove their compliance, not the other way around. And these aren't small inconsistencies. This is systematic, unreported income and undisclosed financial activity over many years. We submitted the report electronically on Monday morning, and by Tuesday afternoon I received an automated confirmation email with a case reference number. The email stated that a preliminary review would begin within 30 to 60 days, and that a full audit would likely follow if the initial findings warranted further investigation. "Now comes the hard part," Laura said over the phone. "Waiting." "How long are we talking about?" "IRS investigations can take months, sometimes over a year for complex cases. This isn't like the credit card fraud where you see immediate results. Think of it as a glacier. It moves slowly, but once it's in motion, nothing can stop it." The metaphor was both comforting and frustrating. I wanted immediate justice, wanted to see my parents face consequences now, not months from now. But Laura pushed back against my impatience. "Danny, you need to use this time productively. Yes, continue documenting anything new you discover. But more importantly, you need to start building a life that isn't defined by their crimes or your reaction to them. You've spent 38 years being their emotional support system and financial safety net. Who is Danielle Carter when she's not playing that role?" The question hit me harder than I expected. I realized I didn't have a good answer. Laura connected me with a therapist who specialized in family trauma and financial abuse. Dr. Patricia Wong was a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and a direct manner that reminded me of my grandmother. In our first session, I told her everything: the drugging, the theft, the attempted murder, the years of being overlooked and undervalued. I cried more in that 50-minute session than I had in the entire previous month. "What you experienced isn't just criminal," Dr. Wong said. "It's profound betrayal by the people who were supposed to protect you. Recovery from that isn't about revenge or justice, though those things matter. It's about reclaiming your sense of self outside of their narrative about who you're supposed to be." She recommended I join a support group for adult children of narcissistic families. I was skeptical at first. My situation seemed too extreme, too criminal to fit into a support group framework. But when I attended my first meeting in a church basement in San Jose, listening to other people's stories, I realized my experience wasn't as unique as I'd thought. The specifics differed, but the patterns were hauntingly similar. The golden child and scapegoat dynamic, the financial exploitation disguised as family obligation, the years of gaslighting that made us question our own perceptions. My father took out credit cards in my name and destroyed my credit by the time I was 25. One woman shared. When I confronted him, he said I was being ungrateful after everything he'd sacrificed for me. "My mother convinced me to co-sign for her house," another man said, "then stopped making payments and disappeared, leaving me with a foreclosure on my record." These weren't just family disputes. They were crimes patterns of abuse that had legal names and psychological frameworks. Knowing that helped me understand my situation wasn't a personal failure, or the result of me being too sensitive as my mother had always claimed. 10 days after submitting the IRS report, a postal truck pulled up to my house, and the driver handed me a certified letter requiring signature. My hands shook as I opened the thick envelope. The letterhead read, "Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division." The letter confirmed receipt of my detailed complaint and informed me that preliminary inquiries had been formally initiated. But the paragraph that made my pulse quicken stated that all parties named in the report would receive official notification of the investigation within 30 days. My parents would know. Soon, they'd receive their own letter, explaining that the federal government was examining their tax filings, their bank accounts, their financial history. They'd know I was the one who'd reported them. I sat on my couch holding that letter, experiencing a cascade of conflicting emotions. There was satisfaction, yes, absolutely, that accountability was finally coming. There was anxiety about how they'd react when they discovered what I'd done. Would they try to contact me? Threaten me? Play the victim to anyone who'd listen? But underneath all of that was grief. Grief for the family. I'd always wished I had the parents who might have loved me unconditionally, the childhood where I'd felt safe and valued. Those things had never existed, I knew that intellectually. But some part of me had kept hoping, kept trying to earn what should have been freely given. That evening, I pulled my grandmother's quilt from the memory box and wrapped it around my shoulders. The stitched numbers and symbols that documented years of theft and manipulation pressed against my skin like an embrace from beyond the grave. And I cried not angry tears or bitter tears, but the deep, exhausted tears of someone finally allowing herself to mourn what she'd never had. Tomorrow, I'd continue fighting. Tomorrow, I'd keep gathering evidence and building my case. But tonight, I let myself feel the full weight of this loss. The government moves quietly, but it never forgets. I was driving home from my therapy session feeling emotionally raw, but somehow lighter when I turned onto my street and saw my parents' car in the driveway. My heart immediately began racing. They weren't supposed to be back yet. Their original plans had them staying in Napa through the weekend, trying to salvage what remained of Emma's honeymoon trip. But here they were, 3 days early, their presence an invasion of the sanctuary I'd been building. I sat in my car for a full minute, steadying my breathing the way Dr. Wong had taught me. Then I gathered my purse, the folder of documents I'd started carrying everywhere, and walked into the house that no longer felt like home. They were in the living room exactly as I'd left it weeks ago, except now it was crowded with their presence. Suitcases lined the hallway. Emma sat on the couch looking small and defeated, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Dad occupied the armchair by the window, staring at his hands. And Mom stood in the center of the room like a general surveying a battlefield, her posture rigid with barely contained fury. "We need to talk about what you've done," she said the moment I crossed the threshold. Her voice had that edge I knew so well, the one that had always made me want to apologize reflexively for existing. But something had changed in me. I set my purse down slowly, deliberately, and met her eyes with a calm I actually felt. "No," I said. "We need to talk about what you did to me." The surprise on her face was almost comical. In 38 years, I had never contradicted her opening salvo. I had always been the one to smooth things over, to de-escalate, to accept blame, even when I'd done nothing wrong. "How dare you speak to me like that after what you put this family through?" Mom began, her voice rising. "Do you have any idea what you've done? Emma's wedding was destroyed. Destroyed. We were humiliated in front of everyone we know. The resort staff treated us like criminals. Guests left early. The photographer refused to work without cash payment. You embarrassed us in front of our entire community. And for what? Some petty grudge. Some imagined slight. I let her rant, watching her performance with the detachment of an analyst studying a specimen. Emma flinched with each accusatory word, and Dad remained motionless, his eyes still fixed on some invisible point on the carpet. When Mom finally paused for breath, I walked to the coffee table and placed my folder down. The sound of it hitting the wood was surprisingly loud in the sudden silence. "This," I said, opening the folder, "is the police report I filed documenting the injection mark on my arm and the symptoms consistent with being drugged." I placed the first document where they could all see it. "This is the hospital record showing elevated insulin levels in my bloodstream at potentially lethal doses. The medical examiner has classified it as attempted poisoning." Mom's face went pale, but she opened her mouth to speak. I continued before she could. This is the IRS complaint I filed detailing 7 years of unreported income fraudulent tax deductions and financial irregularities totaling over $300,000. Another document joined the first. This is the trust fund documentation from Grandma's attorney showing that you violated the terms of her estate and have forfeited all inheritance rights permanently. With each paper I laid down, I watched my mother's composure crack further. Dad finally looked up, and what I saw in his eyes was something I'd never seen before: genuine fear. Not the manipulative kind designed to gain sympathy, but the raw terror of a man realizing his carefully constructed house of cards was collapsing. "You have no proof we did anything wrong," Mom said, but her voice had lost its certainty. "You're making wild accusations to justify your vindictive behavior." "Actually," I replied, my voice steady and cold, "I have all the proof I need. The empty insulin vial with your name on the prescription filled 2 days before you drugged me. The browser history on Dad's computer showing searches for how much insulin is lethal, and insulin death looks natural. The security footage showing you disabled the cameras with your access code at exactly 2:58 a.m. The neighbor who witnessed you leaving at 2:30 in the morning with Grandma's memory box. The credit card company has all the transaction records. The police are building a case. The IRS is conducting an investigation. And my grandmother, God bless her, documented everything you stole for 15 years. Emma's sharp intake of breath cut through the room. "What insulin injection?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Danny, what are you talking about?" I turned to look at my sister, and for the first time since I'd entered the house, I softened. She genuinely didn't know. I could see it in her confusion in the way she was looking between our parents and me, like she'd stumbled into the middle of a play and didn't know her lines. "The night before your wedding," I said gently, "Mom gave me wine that was drugged. While I was unconscious, someone injected me with insulin enough to kill me. Then they took my credit card, disabled the security cameras, and left me alone in the house while all of you went to Napa. They used my card to pay for your wedding. $20,000 charged while I was lying here unconscious, possibly dying." Emma's face crumbled. She looked at our parents with an expression of dawning horror. "You said she couldn't come because of work. You said she sent the money as a gift because she wanted to contribute even though she couldn't be there. You said—" Her voice broke. "You lied to me. About everything." "Emma, don't be ridiculous," Mom said quickly. "Your sister is exaggerating. She's always been dramatic when she doesn't get her way. We simply borrowed her credit card temporarily, and— borrowed. The word came out of me like a whip crack. You drugged me unconscious and tried to kill me. The medical evidence is irrefutable. You didn't borrow anything. You stole from me while attempting to murder me for my inheritance." Emma stood up, her whole body trembling. "Is this true?" she asked our parents. "Did you drug her? Did you try to hurt her?" The silence that followed was deafening. Dad wouldn't meet anyone's eyes. Mom's mouth opened and closed, but no convincing lie emerged. "Oh my God," Emma whispered. "Oh my God, it's true. Everything she's saying is true." She turned to me, tears streaming down her face. "Danny, I swear I didn't know. I swear. I thought I believed everything they told me. I never questioned it because I never had to question anything they said. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." I looked at Emma at her genuine anguish and dawning realization, and saw not the golden child who'd gotten everything, but a woman who'd been just as manipulated as I had been, only in different ways. She'd been kept naive, kept dependent, kept in a bubble where their parents' word was gospel and the world outside was exactly as they described it. Innocence is the sharpest weapon. After the confrontation, my parents left in stony silence, taking Emma with them despite her protests that she wanted to stay and talk. I stood at the window watching their car disappear down the street, feeling simultaneously exhausted and wired with adrenaline. The house felt different now, no longer a crime scene, but a battlefield where I'd won the first real skirmish. I returned to my grandmother's memory box, which still sat on my kitchen table where I'd left it days ago. I'd gone through the contents, carefully found the ledger and the legal documents, but something kept nagging at me. The box felt heavier than it should, given what I'd removed. I picked it up, weighing it in my hands, and noticed the bottom sat slightly higher than the interior depth would suggest. I examined the base more closely, running my fingers along the edges, until I felt something unusual, a series of small magnetic catches cleverly disguised within the decorative carving. When I pressed them in the right sequence, the false bottom released with a soft click, revealing a hidden compartment I'd never known existed. Inside was a single USB drive and a protective case labeled in my grandmother's handwriting, "For Danny, when you need me most." My hands trembled as I carried my laptop to the kitchen table and inserted the drive. There was only one file, a video dated exactly 1 month before my grandmother's death. I double-clicked it, and suddenly she was there on my screen, sitting in her favorite chair by the window of her old house afternoon, sunlight streaming in behind her. She looked so frail, so much thinner than I remembered from our last visit. The cancer had been eating away at her by then, though she'd hidden it well when we were together. But her eyes were still sharp, still intelligent, still filled with that fierce love that had been the only unconditional affection I'd ever known. "Hello, my darling girl," she began, and her voice broke something open in my chest. "If you're watching this, it means they finally showed you who they really are. I'm so sorry you had to experience this, but I'm not surprised. I've been watching, documenting, and preparing for this moment for 3 years now." She shifted in her chair, pulling a shawl tighter around her shoulders. "I need you to understand something, Danny. What they did to you isn't your fault. It was never about you being deficient or difficult or any of the things your mother accused you of being. I watched it happen from the time you were a little girl. I was there the Christmas when you were 12, when you brought home that report card with straight A's, and your mother barely glanced at it, then spent an hour gushing over Emma getting a B+ in art. I watched them give Emma a car for passing her driver's test while you worked 2 jobs to buy your own used Honda. I saw them mold you into their safety net, while treating Emma like their retirement plan, 2 daughters each exploited differently. Neither truly loved the way daughters should be loved. My grandmother's expression hardened with remembered anger. 3 years ago, I started noticing discrepancies in the trust fund I'd established for you. Money was being withdrawn for Emma's benefit, or so they claimed, but the amounts didn't match what Emma actually received. I confronted your father about it, sat him down in my living room and showed him my documentation. And do you know what he said? She paused, her eyes blazing. He admitted he'd been borrowing from the trust, said he'd pay it back eventually, but we both knew that was a lie. Then he made a mistake, he got cocky. He told me that when I was gone, he'd have full control of the trust, and there was nothing I could do about it. He actually smiled when he said it, Danny. Smiled. She leaned forward closer to the camera. That's when I knew I had to act. I went to Attorney Morrison the very next day and restructured everything. The trust is now entirely in your name, with protections so ironclad that even the best lawyers couldn't break them. I've documented every theft, every manipulation, every cruel comment I witnessed over the years. It's all in legal files with Morrison dates, amounts, witnesses when I could find them. Bank records, canceled checks, everything. My grandmother's voice softened. But sweetheart, I've left you something more important than money or evidence. I've left you proof that you're not crazy, you're not oversensitive, you're not imagining things or being dramatic or any of the other gaslighting nonsense your mother has fed you for decades. What they did to you is real. It's documented. It's witnessed. And now you have the power to decide what comes next. She reached toward the camera as if she could touch my face through the screen. Listen to me carefully, my brave girl. You are not responsible for fixing them. You are not responsible for saving them. You are not responsible for earning their love. You were born worthy of it, and their failure to give it to you is their failure, not yours. They will try to make you feel guilty. They will play the victim. They will tell everyone who'll listen that you're ungrateful, vindictive, cruel. Let them. The truth is documented, and the truth will speak for itself. Her expression turned fierce despite her obvious physical weakness. You don't owe them forgiveness, Danny. You don't owe them a relationship. You don't owe them access to your life. The only thing you owe is to yourself truth healing and the freedom to build a life without their poison in it. I'll be watching over you from wherever I am. Make me proud not by being successful or accomplished or any of those external things. Make me proud by being happy, by being free, by choosing yourself for once. That's the best revenge of all living well without them. She smiled then, that warm smile I remembered from childhood, and blew a kiss toward the camera. I love you, Danielle Marie Carter. I always have. I always will. You were my favorite, though I probably shouldn't say that. But it's true. You had a good heart they couldn't corrupt, and a strong spine they couldn't break. Use both now. Be free, my darling. Be gloriously, unapologetically free. The video ended, freezing on her face mid-smile, and I sat at my kitchen table sobbing like I hadn't allowed myself to sob since her funeral. But these weren't tears of grief or anger. They were tears of being seen, being believed, being loved so completely that someone had spent their final months building me a fortress of protection from beyond the grave. Grandma turned her grave into a courtroom. 2 days after watching my grandmother's video, there was a knock at my door at almost 11 at night. I looked through the peephole and saw Emma standing there alone, her shoulders hunched against the cold, her face blotchy from crying. My first instinct was to ignore it, to let her stand there until she gave up and left. But something in her posture, the way she looked small and broken rather than entitled, made me open the door. She stood there for a moment just looking at me, and I noticed immediately that her wedding ring was gone. Her left hand looked naked without it, a pale band of skin marking where it had been just days ago. "Can I come in?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "Please." I stepped aside without speaking, and she entered like she was walking into a stranger's house rather than the home we'd grown up in together. She sat at the kitchen table, the same scarred oak surface where we'd done homework together as children, where I'd helped her with algebra, and she'd helped me practice French pronunciation. The memory felt like it belonged to different people entirely. "My marriage is over," Emma said without preamble. 4 days. That's how long it lasted. He asked for an annulment yesterday. Her voice was flat, emotionless, like she'd cried herself past the point of feeling. "He said he can't trust me. Said I must have known what Mom and Dad were doing, that I was probably in on it from the beginning. He thinks I'm like them, that I helped trap him with a wedding funded by stolen money." I sat down across from her, maintaining distance, keeping my expression neutral. "Did you know?" "No." The word came out fierce, almost angry. "I swear to God, Danny, I thought everything was normal. I thought you were too busy with work to come. Mom told me you'd sent your credit card as a gift, that you wanted to contribute even though you couldn't be there in person. I believed her because why wouldn't I? She's our mother. I never questioned anything they told me, because I never had to. They made my life so easy, so smooth, that I never developed the instinct to doubt them." She put her head in her hands, and her next words came out muffled. "I've been thinking about it constantly since that day in the living room. Every time they gave me something, every time they paid for something, I just accepted it. Never asked where the money came from, never wondered if we could actually afford it. I was so focused on being the perfect daughter, on making them proud, that I never looked beneath the surface to see what they were really doing. I wanted to feel vindicated, to feel satisfied that the golden child was finally seeing the truth. But looking at her hunched over my kitchen table, I mostly felt sad. Sad for both of us, damaged in different ways by the same toxic system. "Emma," I said quietly, "there's something else you should know. I'm pregnant." Her head snapped up, eyes wide. "What?" "About 3 months along. That's actually why Mom was pushing the wedding so hard. She kept saying we needed to do the right thing before I started showing that the church would talk, that people would judge. She made it seem like getting married quickly was the only solution." Emma's hands moved unconsciously to her stomach. "But the thing is, Danny, the relationship wasn't good. It wasn't what I pretended it was. We fought constantly. He was controlling, wanted to know where I was every minute. But Mom said that was normal, that marriage required compromise, that I was being too demanding. That's not normal, I said. That's not healthy. I know that now. But at the time, I believed her because she's always known what's best for me, right? Except she didn't. She just wanted me married so the baby wouldn't be a scandal. Emma's voice cracked. And now I'm alone, pregnant, and I don't even know if I want to be a mother. I never got to figure out what I want because Mom always told me what to want. She chose my major, my career path, my friends, my husband. And now I'm going to bring a baby into this mess, and I'm terrified I'll do to that child what they did to us. The raw honesty of it hit me harder than I expected. This was the real Emma, stripped of the golden child performance, just a scared woman who'd been manipulated as thoroughly as I had been, only with sugar instead of neglect. You won't, I said, because you see it now. That's the difference. Emma wiped her eyes and seemed to gather herself. There's something you need to know. Something that might help with whatever you're building against them. She pulled out her phone with shaking hands. 3 weeks before the wedding, a woman came to the house. Her name was Luella. I only know because I answered the door. She had this expensive briefcase and looked very professional. She met with Dad in his office for hours. When Mom came home and saw her car in the driveway, she lost it. I've never seen her that angry. What did they argue about? I couldn't hear everything, but I was upstairs and the vents carry sound. Dad said something like, "I'm taking care of everyone," and Mom shouted back, "We only need to take care of our family, not your mistakes." I didn't understand what it meant, but it felt important somehow. I leaned forward, every instinct sharpening. Emma, do you know anything else about this woman, Luella? No, but there's more. Dad has a storage unit in Oakland. He doesn't know I know about it. I borrowed his car once about 6 months ago, and I found a receipt in the glove compartment. Monthly rental for a climate-controlled unit. I thought it was weird but didn't think much of it at the time. She scrolled through her phone, then held it out to me. And this. After everything fell apart in Napa, Dad was making phone calls constantly. He thought he was being private, but I recorded one of them. I don't know why I did it. Something just felt wrong. I think you should hear it. I took her phone and she showed me how to play the audio file. It was clearly recorded from another room, the voices slightly muffled but audible. I know the timing is terrible, my father's voice said, but I told you I'd take care of everything after the trust becomes accessible. Just a few more weeks and we'll have enough to finally... A woman's voice, distant but distinct. You've been saying that for 12 years, Robert. I mean it this time. Once everything is settled, you and the boy will be taken care of. I haven't forgotten my responsibilities to you both. She doesn't need to know. Once everything is settled, we can... The recording cut off there, but I'd heard enough. I looked up at Emma, who was watching me with an expression of mingled hope and dread. I don't know who he's talking to, she said. But it doesn't sound like business, does it? No. I agreed, my mind already racing through implications. It doesn't sound like business at all. Blood asked for mercy. Memory built evidence. After Emma left, I sat at my kitchen table listening to that audio recording on repeat, my hands shaking harder with each playthrough. My father's voice so familiar, yet saying words that made no sense in the context of the life I thought I knew. You and Mason will be taken care of. I haven't forgotten my responsibilities to you. Mason. Not a business partner, not a client. A child. A responsibility. I grabbed my laptop and pulled up the bank records I'd been analyzing, the ones showing 12 years of monthly transfers to L. Green. Luella Green. Not a loan officer or business associate, but a woman. A woman my father had been sending $2,000 to every single month like clockwork. An obligation that never wavered, never stopped, never even paused during the months when he claimed our family was struggling financially. The pieces clicked together with devastating clarity. L. Green wasn't a creditor. She was the mother of his child. I called Laura at midnight, not caring that I was waking her. She answered on the third ring alert immediately when she heard the panic in my voice. I need a private investigator, I said. A good one. I need to know everything about Luella Green." Laura didn't ask questions, just promised to have someone on it by morning. "Send me everything you have, the audio file, the bank records, dates, anything that might help." 3 days later, I sat in Laura's office while a private investigator named Marcus Chen laid out his findings in a manila folder that felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Luella Marie Green, age 44. He began sliding a photograph across the desk. Currently works as an administrative assistant at Pemberton Financial Services in San Francisco. She's been with the company for 15 years, steady employment, no criminal record, pays her taxes on time. The woman in the photo was attractive in an understated way, with dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and tired eyes that suggested she worked too hard and slept too little. She looked like someone who'd been carrying a heavy secret for a very long time. "She has a son." Marcus continued, placing another photo on the desk. "Mason Robert Green, age 10. Birth certificate lists father as unknown, but the timing is interesting." He pulled out a timeline he'd created. "Mason was born exactly 9 months after your father left Pemberton Financial to start his consulting business. The monthly transfers to Luella's account began the month Mason was born and have continued without interruption for 10 years. The photo of Mason made my breath catch. He was a handsome boy with light brown hair and a shy smile, but more than that, he had my father's face. The distinctive Carter nose, the shape of his chin, the way his ears sat slightly higher than average. There was no question of paternity. This child was my father's son. "Does the mother know we're investigating?" Laura asked. "I was careful," Marcus assured her. "But there's more. Pemberton Financial is where your father worked before going independent 12 years ago. Luella was working there at the same time. I pulled employment records, they overlapped for 3 years. It's likely that's where the relationship began." I stared at the photos, trying to reconcile this reality with everything I thought I knew. My father had another child, a son who was 10 years old, which meant this affair, this entire second life, had been going on since I was 28. All those years I'd thought Dad was just emotionally distant, withdrawn into his work and his cold marriage. He'd actually been building a separate existence with a woman who gave him something Mom couldn't or wouldn't. "The financial analysis is interesting," Marcus continued. "Based on Luella's income and the $2,000 monthly she receives, she's living modestly but comfortably. The money is going toward rent, utilities, the kids' private school. She's not extravagant. This isn't a mistress being kept in luxury, this is a woman raising a child with minimal support from the father." Laura leaned forward. "So your father has been supporting 2 households on 1 income for a decade. That's not sustainable. Especially when that income has been declining," I added, thinking about the financial records my grandmother had documented. "His consulting business has been struggling for years. He's been taking money from my trust fund, from the church, from anywhere he could find it, trying to keep both lives afloat." The wedding day bank meeting suddenly made perfect sense. My father hadn't left Emma's ceremony to handle some mysterious business transaction. He'd gone to meet with Luella, probably to reassure her that money was coming, that he hadn't forgotten his promises to her and Mason. "Does my mother know?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. Marcus shook his head. "Based on my observations and the arguments neighbors have overheard, Mrs. Carter seems to be in the dark. She knows your father is desperate for money, but she doesn't appear to know why." I thought about Emma's account of the argument she'd overheard Mom screaming, "We only need to take care of our family, not your mistakes." At the time, Mom must have been talking about something else, not understanding the full meaning of her own words. Dad's mistakes weren't business failures. They were a 10-year-old boy named Mason, who looked exactly like him. The attempted murder took on new, horrifying dimensions. My father hadn't just needed money to maintain his lifestyle or cover business debts. He'd needed money to prevent his entire double life from collapsing. If Luella got tired of waiting, if she demanded more support or threatened to expose him if Mason needed something expensive like medical care, the whole facade would crumble. My trust fund wasn't just a convenient target, It was his emergency escape hatch. $1.2 million would be enough to pay off Luella set up Mason's future cover whatever debts had accumulated from maintaining two families and still have something left over. But the trust had protective clauses that prevented him from accessing it while I was alive. So he'd decided I shouldn't be alive. The insulin, the wedding alibi, the careful research into making it look like natural causes, it had all been the desperate act of a man whose dual existences were colliding. He was willing to murder his daughter to hide his affair and save himself from financial and social ruin. I looked at the photo of Mason again, this innocent child who had no idea his father had tried to kill his half-sister to keep him secret. A boy who probably wondered why his dad could never acknowledge him publicly, why he had to be a secret, why he only got scraps of attention and money instead of a real father. Emma and I had both been damaged by our parents' dysfunction, but at least we'd had each other had some form of family structure, however toxic. Mason had been hidden away his very existence, a shameful secret that had to be maintained at any cost, even at the cost of murder. He didn't need a wedding planner, he needed an exit plan. The discovery of my father's second family felt like the final piece of a puzzle I'd been assembling for weeks, but I quickly learned that truth doesn't stay contained once it begins to spread. I didn't have to do anything to publicize what my parents had done. The community did it for me in ways both subtle and devastating. Mrs. DeLuca called me on a Wednesday afternoon, her voice tight with controlled anger. "Danielle, I need to tell you something. After our conversation about the wedding fund, the auxiliary board decided to review all of your mother's requests over the years. We should have done this sooner, but we trusted her. We trusted your family." What they found was a pattern of deception that spanned 7 years. The wedding fund request had been just the most recent in a long series of fraudulent appeals. In 2019, Mom had requested emergency assistance for unexpected medical expenses, totaling $4,000. The auxiliary had rallied, held a bake sale, collected donations. But there were no medical bills, no hospital stays, no health crisis. In 2021, she'd asked for help with Danielle's continuing education costs, to the tune of $3,000, despite the fact that I'd graduated years earlier and had never asked my parents for educational support. That same year, she'd requested funds for Emma's college expenses, even though Emma was attending on a full academic scholarship that covered tuition entirely. "We added it all up," Mrs. DeLuca said. "Over 7 years, your mother collected approximately $18,000 from this church community through sympathy appeals that were based on lies. We feel used, Danielle, manipulated, and we're not staying silent about it." By the following Sunday, the Whisper Network at St. Catherine's had done its work with devastating efficiency. I attended service sitting in my usual pew near the back and watched my parents arrive 15 minutes late, their lateness itself a sign of how rattled they were. Mom's hair wasn't perfectly styled for the first time I could remember. Dad's suit looked rumpled. The change in how people treated them was subtle, but unmistakable. Mrs. Patterson, who'd always greeted my mother warmly, turned away to examine her hymnal. The Rodriguezes, who'd been friends with my parents for 20 years, suddenly became very interested in the stained glass windows. When Mom tried to join a conversation in the fellowship hall after service, the group dispersed like water around a stone. No one was overtly rude, that wasn't how this community operated, but the cold shoulders and conspicuous silences communicated everything. I watched it happen from across the room, and while part of me felt vindicated, another part felt sad for the isolation they'd brought upon themselves. The social consequences extended beyond church. Through my professional network, I heard that word of the IRS investigation had reached my father's business contacts. In our community, being under federal audit carried implications far beyond mere tax issues. It suggested financial impropriety, unreliability, potential criminality. Dad's consulting business had always relied heavily on reputation and personal relationships, and both were evaporating rapidly. Sarah, my mutual friend with Emma, worked in commercial real estate and heard through industry channels that Dad had lost 3 major clients in 1 week. "They're not even giving him a reason," she told me over coffee. "Just saying they're restructuring or going in a different direction. but everyone knows it's because they don't want to be associated with someone under federal investigation. His pending membership application to the Oak Hills Country Club, which he'd been pursuing for 2 years as a status symbol and networking opportunity, was suddenly tabled indefinitely. The membership committee cited administrative delays, but everyone understood what that meant. The club didn't want the scandal of admitting someone who might end up indicted for fraud. Even their attempt to quietly downsize and sell the house, presumably to raise cash to cover mounting debts, collapsed when their real estate agent dropped them as clients. The agent, Marcy Sullivan, had been a family friend for years, but she sent a brief email citing scheduling conflicts that made it impossible to continue representing them. Sarah later told me that Marcy had confided to another agent that she couldn't afford to be associated with that mess. Throughout all of this social disintegration, I said nothing publicly. The temptation to post on social media to tell my side of the story, to respond to the few people who still defended my parents, was enormous. But Laura counseled patience and strategic silence. Let their actions speak for themselves, she advised. Right now, you're the calm, dignified daughter dealing with a difficult family situation through proper legal channels. Your parents are the ones making scenes, spreading conflicting stories and looking increasingly desperate. In the court of public opinion, the person who stays composed and quiet while chaos swirls around them is usually seen as the wronged party. When neighbors or acquaintances approached me with carefully worded questions about the situation, I gave the same measured response every time. It's a private family matter being handled through appropriate legal channels. I appreciate your concern, but I'm not able to discuss the details. This restraint cost me something. There were moments I wanted to scream the truth to tell everyone exactly what my parents had done to me. But I was learning something crucial about power. Sometimes the most devastating thing you can do is nothing at all. My silence created a vacuum that people filled with their own observations and conclusions. They watched my parents become increasingly frantic and defensive, watched their stories change and contradict themselves, watched the facade of the perfect Carter family crack and crumble. Mrs. Patterson mentioned to me after church that Mom had called her the previous week, asking if she'd be willing to clarify her statement about seeing them leave at 2:30 in the morning. She wanted me to say I'd been mistaken about the time, or that maybe it was a different night entirely. Mrs. Patterson told me, her voice full of distaste. I told her I knew exactly what I'd seen, and I wasn't going to lie for her. The audacity of asking me to change my story. I listened and thanked her for her honesty, said nothing more. But I noted how Mrs. Patterson's story spread through the neighborhood, how each attempted manipulation by my parents became ammunition against them, how every lie they told created more witnesses to their dishonesty. Soft power breaks hard walls. Father Tom called me on a Thursday evening, his voice careful and measured in the way clergy learn to be when delivering difficult news. Danielle, your mother has reached out to me. She's asking if you'd be willing to meet with her in my office with me present as a mediator and spiritual counselor. I want to be clear that you're under no obligation to agree, but she seems genuinely distressed and claims she has things she needs to say to you. My initial response was an immediate no. I'd maintained my strategic silence, built my case, and had no interest in giving my mother another opportunity to manipulate me. But when I called Laura to tell her about the request, she surprised me with her response. Go, she said. Not for reconciliation, but for information. People often reveal things in these mediated settings that they'd never say otherwise. Keep your boundaries firm, don't let her manipulate you emotionally, but listen to what she says. It might be useful for the legal case, and at minimum, you'll have a witness to whatever she claims. So I found myself walking into Father Tom's office on Sunday afternoon, my stomach tight with anxiety despite my determination to remain detached. Mom was already there, sitting in one of the counseling chairs, and I almost didn't recognize her. She looked like she'd aged a decade in the past few weeks. Her hair, usually impeccably styled and colored, showed gray roots and hung limp around her face. She wore no makeup, and I could see the lines around her eyes and mouth that she usually concealed so carefully. She looked small, diminished, like a woman who'd been hollowed out from the inside. Father Tom gestured to the chair across from my mother, not beside her, and I was grateful for that small mercy. I sat down, maintaining physical and emotional distance, my posture deliberately neutral. "Danielle has agreed to hear what you want to say, Emily," Father Tom said gently. "But I want to establish that this is a safe space for both of you. No accusations, no attacks. Just honest communication." Mom nodded, her hands twisting in her lap. When she looked up at me, her eyes were already wet with tears. "I need you to understand something about me, about where I came from. I've never talked about this because it was too painful, but you deserve to know." She took a shaking breath and began to speak about her childhood, a topic she'd always deflected or dismissed in the past. She was the youngest of 4 daughters raised by my maternal grandmother, a woman I'd only met a handful of times before she died when I was 15. According to Mom, Grandma Helen had been cold critical and played favorites with devastating precision. Mom's older sister Patricia had been the golden child who could do no wrong, while Mom had been overlooked, criticized, and constantly reminded that she didn't measure up. I remember bringing home report cards with all A's, and Mother would say, "Well, Patricia got A+. When I made the cheerleading squad, she said, "Patricia was captain. Nothing I did was ever enough." Mom's voice cracked. "I swore when I had children that I would never do that to them. I swore I would love them equally fairly, that I wouldn't create the same dynamic that destroyed my self-worth." She pulled a folded letter from her purse, the paper yellowed and soft from age. "This came from my mother 3 years before she died. I've kept it because it reminded me of what I was trying to escape." She handed it to me, and I read words that could have been written about my own childhood criticisms of her parenting. Unfavorable comparisons to Patricia's children, accusations that she was raising Emma to be spoiled and entitled, while neglecting to give me proper attention and discipline. "She saw what I was doing," Mom whispered. Even as I tried so hard not to repeat her mistakes, I was creating the same pattern. Golden child and scapegoat, favorite and forgotten. I became what I hated most. Father Tom spoke quietly. "Emily, acknowledging the cycle is important. But Danielle needs to hear about the specific choices you made, not just the context." Mom nodded, wiping her eyes. "I knew using your credit card was wrong. I knew it was theft. I knew that drugging you was assault. Your father kept saying we were out of options, that the trust fund had those protective clauses, and we couldn't access it while you were alive, that we were drowning in debt, and this was the only way to save the family. He made it sound like we were protecting everyone, including you, by handling things this way." "You tried to kill me," I said, my voice flat. "That's not handling things. That's attempted murder." "I didn't know about the insulin," she said quickly, desperately. "I swear to you, Danielle, I didn't know what your father was planning. He told me it was just a sedative, something to keep you asleep long enough for us to get to Napa and establish our alibi. I gave you the drugged wine because he said it was necessary, but I thought you'd just wake up with a hangover and be angry at us. I didn't know—" "You didn't ask?" I interrupted. "You didn't want to know, so you didn't ask questions. That's not the same as innocence." She flinched, but didn't deny it. "You're right. I chose not to look too closely at what he was planning because if I didn't know the details, I could tell myself I wasn't really responsible. I chose to trust your father's judgment over protecting you. I chose preserving my marriage, preserving our social standing, preserving the illusion of our family over doing what was right." The words hung in the air between us, a confession that felt both too much and too little. "I'm not asking you to forgive me," Mom continued. "I don't deserve forgiveness. But I wanted you to understand that I'm not a monster who set out to destroy her daughter. I'm a weak, frightened woman who made terrible choices because I was too damaged myself to be the mother you needed. That doesn't excuse anything, it just explains it. I looked at this woman who'd given birth to me, raised me, and ultimately betrayed me in the most fundamental way possible. I could see the scared child she'd once been, overlooked and desperate for love she never received. I could see the cycle of abuse that had shaped her into someone who perpetuated what she'd suffered. I could even feel a flicker of compassion for that frightened girl trapped inside this middle-aged woman. But compassion didn't erase what she'd done. "You had choices I didn't have," I said quietly. "You were an adult when you became a mother. You could have gotten therapy. You could have broken the cycle. You could have protected me when your husband suggested drugging me and stealing from me. At any point, you could have chosen differently. And when it mattered most, you chose him over me. That's the truth we both have to live with now." Mom dissolved into tears, and Father Tom handed her tissues while murmuring something comforting. I sat watching, feeling strangely detached from the scene, as if I were observing it from a great distance. Understanding broke my heart. It didn't change my mind. I left Father Tom's office feeling emotionally hollowed out, understanding my mother's pain, but unchanged in my resolve. I drove home in silence, crawled into bed fully clothed, and tried to sleep despite the conversation replaying endlessly in my mind. At 2 a.m, my phone rang with an unknown number. My first instinct was to ignore it, but something made me answer. "Is this Danielle Carter?" a woman's voice asked, professional and calm in the way that immediately signals bad news. "Yes. This is Nurse Rodriguez from County General Hospital. Your sister, Emma Carter, was brought in by ambulance approximately an hour ago. You're listed as her emergency contact. She's stable, but we need you to come in." My heart stuttered. What happened? Is she hurt? "I can't give details over the phone, but she's asking for you. She's in the psychiatric observation unit on the 4th floor." The drive to the hospital felt both endless and too short. My mind raced through possibilities, each worse than the last. When I arrived at the psychiatric unit and spoke with the attending physician, Dr. Chen, he delivered the news with gentle directness. "A neighbor found your sister in her car in a parking garage with the engine running. The neighbor noticed exhaust filling the enclosed space and called 911. Emma had written a suicide note, but when the paramedics arrived, she was conscious and cooperative. She told them she'd sat there for 20 minutes but couldn't go through with it." He paused. "Physically, she's fine. We're holding her for 72-hour psychiatric observation. She's been asking for you since she arrived." Part of me wanted to call my parents to make this their problem, like everything else had always been their problem. But a deeper part remembered Emma at 7 years old, crawling into my bed during thunderstorms, whispering that she was scared. Remembered the girl who'd brought me dandelions from the yard because she thought they were beautiful. Remembered that beneath the golden child performance was a person I'd once loved before our parents' dysfunction had twisted everything between us. "Can I see her?" Dr. Chen led me to a small private room where Emma sat on the bed in a hospital gown, her hair tangled, her face bare of the makeup she usually wore like armor. She looked up when I entered, and the raw devastation in her eyes made my throat tight. "You came?" she whispered. "Of course I came." I sat in the chair beside her bed, maintaining some distance but present. "Emma, what happened?" "I can't do this." Her voice was small, broken. "I can't bring a baby into this mess. I can't be a mother when I don't even know who I am. Everything I thought I was, everything I thought I wanted, it was all lies they fed me. And now I'm going to have a daughter, and what if I do to her what they did to us?" "You won't," I said, but she shook her head violently. "How do you know Mom said the same thing? She told me once that she swore she'd never treat her children the way her mother treated her. And look what happened. The cycle just continues. I'll mess this kid up the way they messed us up, and she'll mess up her kids, and it never ends." Emma's hands moved to her stomach, still barely showing the pregnancy beneath the hospital gown. "I don't want her to feel the way I've felt my whole life, Danny. Like I'm only valuable if I'm perfect. Like love is something I have to earn by performing and pleasing and never making mistakes. Like one wrong step and everyone will see I'm not really special, I'm just ordinary, and ordinary isn't enough." I moved from the chair to sit on the edge of her bed, close enough to touch, but waiting for permission. "Is that how you felt all those years when I thought you had everything?" "I had nothing," she said, tears streaming down her face. "I had their approval, which disappeared the second I did something they didn't like. I had attention, but it came with impossible expectations. I had gifts and money and praise, but all of it was conditional. You were right to leave Danny. You saw through it and got out. I should have done the same, but I didn't know how. I didn't even know I was allowed to. She looked at me with devastating clarity. I'm going to be a single mother. No job skills because Mom said I didn't need to focus on career when I had other talents. No savings because everything was always paid for me. No idea who I am or what I want because I've spent my whole life being what they wanted me to be. And now there's a baby coming and I'm terrified I'll damage her the way they damaged us because I don't know any other way to be. I took her hand and she gripped it like a lifeline. Emma, listen to me. You're not going to raise this baby alone, and you're not going to raise her in that house surrounded by their poison. You're going to come stay with me. She stared at me like I'd spoken a foreign language. What? Move in with me. We'll figure this out together not as their daughters, but as sisters, who are building something different, something better. The words came out with certainty I hadn't known I possessed. I have the trust fund now. Grandma's money completely protected from them. There's enough for both of us to start over to build lives that aren't defined by their dysfunction. Why would you do that? Emma asked, her voice barely audible. After everything they did to you, everything I didn't see or stop. Because you're my sister, I said simply. And because breaking this cycle means making sure the next generation doesn't suffer what we suffered. Your daughter deserves better than what we got. So do you. So do I. Emma collapsed against me, sobbing in a way that sounded like years of pressure finally releasing. I held her, this woman who'd been my rival and my burden and my responsibility, and saw her clearly for perhaps the first time, not the golden child who had everything but another casualty of our parents' toxicity, damaged in different ways, but damaged nonetheless. I'm not fighting for revenge anymore, I whispered into her hair. I'm fighting for you, for your daughter, for the family we can choose to become instead of the one we were born into. We sat like that until Emma's sobs quieted, until the nurse came to check on her, until the first light of dawn started filtering through the hospital window. And somewhere in those hours, I understood that this protecting my sister, offering her sanctuary, choosing to break the cycle, this was the real victory. Not the legal case or the financial justice or the social consequences my parents were facing. This was freedom, the ability to choose love over bitterness, connection over isolation, healing over perpetual warfare. We weren't their property. We were each other's salvation. 6 months passed in a way that felt both impossibly fast and reassuringly slow. Emma moved into my spare bedroom 3 days after being released from psychiatric observation, bringing 2 suitcases and a determination to build a life that looked nothing like the one our parents had scripted for her. The house transformed gradually from my solitary refuge into something that felt like an actual home. Emma's ultrasound photos went up on the refrigerator, held by magnets shaped like baby bottles that she'd bought at Target. Pregnancy books accumulated on the coffee table, their pages marked with sticky notes, as she researched everything from prenatal nutrition to attachment parenting theories. The silence I'd grown accustomed to was replaced by the sounds of someone else living here. Footsteps in the hallway, water running in the second bathroom. Emma's occasional laughter at something she'd seen on her phone. Emma was in her 3rd trimester now, visibly pregnant, in a way that made strangers smile at her in grocery stores and offer to carry her bags. She'd enrolled in online courses for early childhood education, determined to build skills that would let her support herself and her daughter. I watched her study at the kitchen table in the evenings, taking notes with the same fierce concentration she'd once applied to pleasing our parents, except now she was doing it for herself. My own life had shifted in ways I hadn't anticipated. At work, where I'd spent years being professionally competent but never quite visible, I'd started advocating for myself. I realized that family drama had consumed so much of my mental energy that I'd never pushed for promotions or recognition. 3 months after Emma moved in, I was promoted to senior analyst with a salary increase that finally reflected my experience and contributions. I started going to happy hours with colleagues, building relationships that existed outside the shadow of my family dysfunction. I'd even started dating something that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. His name was Michael, a project manager I'd met through a mutual friend, and he knew the basics of my situation but didn't treat me like I was broken or damaged. We went to movies, tried new restaurants, had conversations that had nothing to do with trust funds or toxic families or legal proceedings. It felt like glimpsing what normal life might look like. Through it all, I maintained my weekly therapy sessions with Dr. Wong. We worked on establishing boundaries, processing trauma, and understanding that healing wasn't linear. Some weeks I felt strong and clear-headed. Other weeks I still woke up angry, grieving the family I'd never really had. The legal proceedings had faded into background noise, something I knew was progressing but tried not to fixate on. Laura checked in regularly with updates about the IRS investigation, but mostly, we talked about other things. Her kids, my dating life, Emma's pregnancy preparations. Then on a Tuesday morning in early October, a postal truck pulled up and delivered a thick, certified letter requiring my signature. The return address read, Internal Revenue Service, Criminal Investigation Division. I stood in my driveway holding the envelope, my heart suddenly racing. Emma was inside making breakfast and I could smell coffee and toast through the open door. I took the envelope inside and sat at the kitchen table, Emma watching me with worried eyes as I opened it. The cover letter was formal and thorough. After a comprehensive 6-month investigation, the IRS had concluded their review of the Carter family financial irregularities. The findings were detailed across 12 pages of documentation, but the summary was devastating in its clarity. The IRS had identified $147,000 in unreported income related to trust fund withdrawals over 7 years. My parents had treated my grandmother's trust as their personal bank account, reporting none of it on their tax returns. The calculated tax liability was approximately $38,000, but with penalties and interest accumulated over years of non-compliance, the total amount owed exceeded $60,000. The church auxiliary donations presented additional concerns. My mother had claimed charitable deductions for money donated to the church's emergency fund, while simultaneously receiving money from that same fund under false pretenses. The IRS termed this circular fraud and noted it as a particularly egregious form of tax evasion. Most significantly, the report addressed the mysterious L. Green payments. My father had claimed Emma as a dependent for tax purposes during years when he was actually providing substantial financial support to another child. The IRS had cross-referenced the monthly payments with Luella Green's tax records and Mason's birth certificate. The pattern was unmistakable child support payments that should have been reported but weren't dependency claims that were fraudulent, and a systematic effort to hide the existence of a second family from federal authorities. The final paragraph made my hands shake. Based on the substantial evidence of willful tax evasion, fraudulent claims, and systematic unreporting of income, this case is being referred to the Criminal Investigation Division for potential prosecution. All involved parties will receive notification of these findings within 5 business days. Emma reached across the table and took my hand. "It's really happening," she said quietly. "They're actually going to face consequences." 3 days later, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, but a San Francisco area code that made me answer immediately. The woman on the other end identified herself as Assistant District Attorney Maria Rodriguez. "Ms. Carter, I'm calling because our office has received the IRS referral regarding your parents' case. Combined with the police report you filed about the insulin incident and assault, we believe there's sufficient evidence to pursue criminal charges. I'd like to meet with you to discuss the strength of the case and determine what charges we can realistically pursue." I put the phone on speaker so Emma could hear. "What kind of charges are we talking about?" "Potentially multiple felonies. Tax fraud, embezzlement from the trust fund, assault with intent to cause great bodily harm. Possibly attempted murder, depending on how we can prove intent with the insulin. I have to be honest with you, Ms. Carter. Cases involving family members are challenging. Juries are often reluctant to convict parents of crimes against their children, and defense attorneys will paint you as vindictive or exaggerating. But the evidence you've gathered is extraordinarily thorough. If you're willing to testify, if you're willing to see this through to trial if necessary, I believe we can achieve justice here." I looked at Emma, whose hand rested protectively on her swollen belly. She nodded without hesitation. "We're willing," I said. "Both of us. Not for revenge, for accountability. So the next generation doesn't grow up thinking this kind of behavior is normal or acceptable." As I said it, I rested my hand on Emma's belly beside hers, feeling the flutter of movement from my niece who would be born into a different kind of family than the one that had damaged her mother and aunt. D.A. Rodriguez's voice warmed slightly. "Then let's get to work. I'll send over paperwork for you to review, and we'll schedule a meeting for next week. Ms. Carter, I want you to know what you've done here, the way you've documented everything, the patience you've shown. It's going to make all the difference." After we hung up, Emma and I sat in silence for a long moment. 6 months of waiting, 6 months of healing and building and growing had led to this moment. The legal machinery was finally catching up to the crimes committed against us. The glacier finally reached the valley. The meeting with D.A. Rodriguez was scheduled for the following Tuesday at the district attorney's office in downtown San Francisco. Laura drove me and Emma came along despite being uncomfortable in her 3rd trimester, insisting she needed to hear everything firsthand. We were shown into a conference room where D.A. Rodriguez waited with a man she introduced as Robert Chen, a forensic accountant who specialized in financial fraud cases. Robert Chen looked exactly like what you'd expect from someone who spent his professional life untangling complex financial schemes, middle-aged, wearing wire-rimmed glasses, carrying a briefcase that bulged with documents. He set up his laptop and projected a series of spreadsheets onto the screen at the front of the room. "What I'm about to show you," he began without preamble, "is one of the most elaborate cases of financial fraud disguised as family dysfunction that I've encountered in 20 years of doing this work." The first slide showed a web of interconnected accounts, credit cards, loans, and transfers that looked like something from a conspiracy theorist's wall. Chen walked us through it methodically, and with each revelation, the scope of my father's deception became more staggering. "Your father wasn't just supporting 2 families," Chen explained. "He was running what we call a Ponzi scheme against himself. He'd take cash advances from 1 credit card to make minimum payments on 3 others. He'd get a home equity loan to cover business expenses that should have been paid from revenue. He'd liquidate retirement investments to maintain the illusion of a successful consulting practice that was actually generating minimal income." The numbers on the screen were dizzying. Credit card debt totaling $97,000 across 11 different cards. A home equity line of credit maxed out at $85,000. Personal loans from peer-to-peer lending platforms adding another $43,000. Business debts documented but unpaid totaling $55,000. Combined with the monthly obligation to Luella Green, Chen continued, your father's household was carrying approximately $280,000 in debt while presenting an image of upper-middle-class comfort. The debt was accelerating because he was paying interest on interest taking new debt to service old debt, and the whole structure was on the verge of collapse. Laura leaned forward. When would it have collapsed? Based on the trajectory, I'd estimate he had maybe 6 months before bankruptcy became unavoidable. And bankruptcy would have exposed everything, the second family, the embezzlement from the trust fund, all of it. Your father needed a large influx of cash immediately, and the only source available was Danielle's trust fund, which he couldn't access while she was alive. Emma made a small sound of distress, and I reached over to squeeze her hand. But there's more, Chen said, advancing to the next slide. On the night of the assault, someone accessed Danielle's phone while she was unconscious and used her thumbprint to authorize digital signatures on several documents. The screen showed scanned copies of forms I'd never seen before. One was labeled Voluntary Transfer Authorization and stated that I was voluntarily moving $50,000 from my trust fund to my parents' joint account as a gift to support family needs. Another document was a loan agreement claiming I had borrowed $20,000 from my parents for unspecified personal expenses and was agreeing to repay them through monthly trust fund transfers. These documents, Chen said, were backdated and notarized using an online notary service that only requires digital verification. If you had died that night, these documents would have provided legal justification for your parents to access your trust fund. They would claim you'd already agreed to the transfers before your death, and with you unable to contradict them, the trustee might have honored the requests. That's why they needed me unconscious, I said, the realization settling like ice in my chest. Not just to get me out of the way for the wedding, but to get my thumbprint for the digital signatures. Exactly, D.A. Rodriguez confirmed. This wasn't impulsive. This was planned, methodical, and sophisticated. Which brings us to what we found in the storage unit. Emma had mentioned the storage unit, but I hadn't known the DA would actually search it. Chen pulled up photos on the screen, and I found myself looking at the interior of a climate-controlled space filled with cardboard boxes and plastic storage containers, all meticulously labeled. Your father has been renting this unit for 12 years, Chen explained. Based on the contents, he used it to store everything related to his second family that he couldn't keep at home. The photos showed birthday cards addressed to Mason, some of them handmade with crayon drawings. School photos showing the boy at various ages, his resemblance to my father becoming more pronounced each year. Report cards, vaccination records, even drawings that Mason had made for Daddy that had been carefully preserved in protective sleeves. It was evidence of a parallel fatherhood, a secret life of love and attention given to a child who had to be hidden, while Emma and I received the scraps of whatever emotional energy he had left. But then Chen showed us the other boxes, and the nature of what we were looking at changed entirely. These documents are more concerning, he said quietly. He displayed photos of file folders labeled with my name. Inside were copies of my medical records dating back 10 years, records that should have been private that he had no legal right to possess. There were life insurance policies I'd never seen or signed listing my parents as sole beneficiaries with death benefits totaling $800,000. Most chilling was a yellow legal pad filled with my father's handwriting notes and calculations that Chen had photographed page by page. I read the words on the screen and felt my blood turn cold. If D becomes permanent problem, medical solution most defensible. Natural causes equals no investigation. Insulin undetectable if administered correctly. Home alone during family event equals perfect alibi. Insurance plus trust equals 2 LM total. Enough to settle LG clear debts, start fresh. There were calculations beneath the text breaking down how the money would be allocated. $400,000 to Luella as a settlement for Mason's future. $300,000 to pay off debts. $200,000 for Emma's expenses. The rest labeled simply as Freedom Fund. My father had literally calculated the financial value of my death and determined it was worth more than my life. This note, D.A. Rodriguez said, combined with the insulin purchase, the internet searches, and the forged documents gives us clear evidence of premeditated attempted murder. Your father didn't just want your money. He planned your death, researched how to do it, and executed that plan. The only reason you're alive is because your body proved more resilient than he anticipated. I sat in that conference room staring at my father's handwriting spelling out my murder and felt something beyond anger or hurt. This was clarity, pure and absolute. This wasn't about family dysfunction or emotional damage. This was about a man who had decided his daughter was worth more dead than alive and had acted on that decision with cold calculation. They didn't just plan to rob me. They scripted my death. The raids happened on a Tuesday morning while Emma and I were having breakfast. We didn't witness any of it directly. D.A. Rodriguez had been clear that I needed to stay far away from the actual execution of the warrants to avoid any appearance that I was orchestrating a personal vendetta. Instead, we learned about it through a phone call at 8:30 a.m., Rodriguez's voice carrying barely contained satisfaction. "It's happening now," she said. "IRS criminal investigation agents are at your parents' home with local police backup. They have warrants to seize financial documents, computers, phones, any electronic devices that might contain evidence. Simultaneously, we have teams at your father's business office and the Oakland storage unit. We're also serving subpoenas to every bank and financial institution your parents have dealt with over the past 15 years. I put the phone on speaker so Emma could hear my hand shaking slightly as I set it on the kitchen table between us. How long will this take? The physical searches several hours, but this is just the beginning of evidence collection. We've coordinated everything to happen at once, so they can't warn each other, can't destroy documents, can't move money or hide assets. This is real now, Ms. Carter. This is a federal case with state criminal charges pending. Your family can't make this go away with lawyers or explanations, or by claiming it's all a misunderstanding. After we hung up, Emma and I sat in silence for a long moment. I imagined my parents waking up to federal agents at their door watching strangers box up their financial records, their computers, the carefully maintained facade of their lives being systematically dismantled. Part of me felt vindicated. Part of me just felt sad. 2 days later, Rodriguez called again with news that genuinely surprised me. Luella Green had contacted the DA's office through an attorney requesting a meeting to discuss cooperation in exchange for immunity from any potential conspiracy charges. She wants to testify, I asked, trying to process this development. More than that, she's been documenting her relationship with your father for years. Emails, text messages, even recorded phone calls. She says she started keeping records about 5 years ago when he kept promising to leave your mother and never did. She wanted proof of paternity and proof of his financial obligations in case he ever tried to deny Mason or cut them off entirely. The meeting with Luella was arranged for the following week, and Rodriguez asked if I wanted to be present. I declined. I wasn't ready to meet my father's mistress and my half-brother's mother face to face. But I received a full transcript of her testimony, and reading it felt like watching another piece of my father's carefully constructed lies crumble. Luella explained that my father had told her about needing to access my trust fund, framing it as complicated family estate issues that would be resolved soon. He'd promised her that once he had the money, he'd finally leave my mother set up a proper trust for Mason, and they could be a real family instead of a hidden secret. She'd believed these promises for 12 years, accepting the monthly support payments while raising their son essentially alone. But 3 weeks before Emma's wedding, his tone had changed. He'd told Luella he needed to resolve some financial issues permanently before they could move forward with their plans. He'd asked her to meet him on the wedding day, that mysterious bank meeting in San Francisco that I'd traced through the VIP transportation charge to sign documents, making her the beneficiary of a life insurance policy. I thought it was sweet, Luella had told the prosecutor, her voice breaking according to the transcript. I thought he was finally taking concrete steps toward being with us openly. But then I saw the news coverage of the wedding disaster in Napa, and something felt wrong. I started putting pieces together, the timing, his desperation, the way he'd been talking about solving everything permanently. I realized the life insurance policy wasn't about protecting me. It was about paying me off after something happened to someone else. She'd provided boxes of evidence, 12 years of text messages, emails promising a future together that never came, recordings of phone conversations where he discussed his financial pressures and his plans to access the trust fund. In one particularly damning recording from 2 weeks before the wedding, my father told Luella, "Once this is resolved, Mason will have everything he deserves. College fully funded, a real relationship with his father, everything I couldn't give him before. Just a few more weeks, and all the obstacles will be removed." Obstacles. He'd called me an obstacle to be removed. The final piece of evidence came from an unexpected source. Attorney Morrison, my grandmother's lawyer, requested a meeting with DA Rodriguez and asked that I be present. He arrived at the prosecutor's office carrying a sealed envelope that looked like it had been stored in a safe deposit box for years. "Your grandmother left this with me 3 years before her death," Morrison explained, breaking the seal carefully. "She gave me very specific instructions if Danielle ever filed a police report or legal complaint alleging harm from her family, I was to provide this to the investigating authorities immediately." He set up a laptop and played a video file dated 3 years earlier. My grandmother appeared on screen, sitting in Morrison's office, looking frailer than I remembered, but with eyes that were sharp and determined. Across from her sat my father, clearly uncomfortable, his body language defensive. "Robert, I've gone through the trust fund records," my grandmother said on the video, her voice steady despite her obvious illness. "Money has been withdrawn for Emma's benefit that she never received. I want to know where it went." My father's face on the screen shifted through several expressions: surprise, anger, then a forced calm. "Mother Helen, you're misunderstanding the accounting. Those expenses were legitimate, they just—" "Don't lie to me," she interrupted. "I've verified with Emma's school, her bank, her landlord. The money didn't go to her. Where did it go?" There was a long silence before my father spoke again, his voice lower. "I needed it. I have responsibilities you don't understand. Obligations that have to be met." "So you admit you took money designated for your daughter's benefit and used it for yourself?" "I'll pay it back," he said, but even on the video the lie was obvious. How your business is failing, Robert. You're drowning in debt. You have no way to repay what you've stolen." My grandmother leaned forward, and her next words were delivered with absolute clarity. "If you harm Danielle, if you manipulate her, if you try to take what I've protected for her, everything I know will come to light. This conversation is my insurance policy. This recording, these documents, they'll all go to the authorities. Do you understand me?" My father actually laughed, a dismissive sound. "You're being dramatic. Nobody's going to harm anyone. I just need access to the trust, and once you're gone—" He stopped, seeming to realize what he'd just implied. "Once I'm gone, you'll have nothing," my grandmother said coldly. "I've already restructured everything with Mr. Morrison. The trust is protected now. You can't touch it. And if you try to hurt my granddaughter, this video and everything else I've documented will ensure you spend the rest of your life in prison." The video ended there, freezing on my grandmother's fierce expression. Morrison looked at me with something like sorrow. She knew Danielle. She saw what they were capable of, and she spent her last years protecting you the only way she could. Even from the grave, she's still protecting you. Paper doesn't lie. Neither do grandmothers. 4 weeks after the raids, I sat in a crowded courtroom watching my parents be formally arraigned on criminal charges that could send them to prison for decades. The charges against my father were read aloud by the clerk in a monotone that somehow made them more horrifying. Attempted murder, aggravated fraud, embezzlement from a trust fund, conspiracy to commit financial fraud, and multiple counts of tax evasion. Combined, he faced 20 to 30 years in state and federal prison. My mother stood beside him, smaller, somehow charged as an accessory to fraud and assault with potential sentences of 3 to 5 years. The courtroom was packed. I recognized faces from church, from the neighborhood, even some of my father's former business associates who'd come perhaps out of morbid curiosity or the desire to witness the fall of someone who'd once seemed untouchable. Local media filled the back rows, reporters with notepads ready to document every moment of the Carter family's public destruction. Emma sat beside me in the gallery, 8 months pregnant now, her belly a visible reminder of what we were fighting for. She'd insisted on coming, despite her discomfort, despite the stress, because she wanted our father to see that we stood together. My parents' attorney, a smooth-talking defense lawyer named Mitchell Brennan, who specialized in white-collar crime, made his opening argument to the judge. He painted me as a vindictive daughter with documented mental health issues who'd fabricated or exaggerated events to punish her parents for perceived slights. "Ms. Carter has been in therapy for months," he said, as if this proved instability rather than healing. Laura was on her feet immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. The defense is misrepresenting the nature of my client's therapy. She began seeing Dr. Patricia Wong only after the assault, specifically for trauma recovery related to being drugged and nearly killed by her parents. There are no pre-existing mental health conditions, and suggesting otherwise is a deliberate attempt to discredit a crime victim." Laura submitted documentation from Dr. Wong clearly stating the timeline and nature of the therapy. The judge, a woman in her 60s named Margaret Solis, looked at Brennan with obvious disapproval. Counsel attacking a victim for seeking help after trauma is not a winning strategy in my courtroom. Move on. The preliminary hearing proceeded with multiple witnesses establishing probable cause for trial. Medical experts testified about the insulin levels in my blood. Forensic accountants walked through the financial fraud. IRS agents presented their findings. But the moment that changed everything came when DA Rodriguez called Emma to the stand. The courtroom fell completely silent as Emma walked forward, one hand supporting her lower back, moving with the careful waddle of late pregnancy. She was sworn in and sat down, and I could see her hands trembling in her lap. Rodriguez began with gentle questions, establishing Emma's relationship to the defendant and the context of the recorded phone call. Emma confirmed it was our father's voice, explained when and why she'd recorded it. But then Rodriguez asked a broader question. Emma, can you describe the family dynamic in the Carter household? Emma took a breath, and when she spoke, her voice was stronger than I'd heard it in months. My father didn't just hurt Danielle. He hurt all of us. He created a family where love wasn't freely given. It had to be earned through performance and compliance, where we all lived in fear of disappointing him, of tarnishing the perfect image he demanded we maintain. I was the golden child, supposedly, but that just meant I was trapped in a different kind of cage. Every achievement had to be perfect. Every choice had to reflect well on the family. When I got pregnant, he pressured me into a marriage I didn't want because appearances mattered more than my happiness or safety. She looked directly at our father for the first time, and I saw him flinch. What you did to Danielle was evil. Drugging her, trying to kill her, stealing from her, that was evil. But the years of emotional abuse, the manipulation, the way you used both of us as props in your performance of being a good father, that was evil too. And I'm done protecting you. We both are. As Emma stepped down from the witness stand, our father suddenly stood up, his face purple with rage. You ungrateful! He shouted, but Brennan grabbed his arm and pulled him back into his seat. The outburst lasted only seconds, but it was enough. The mask of the reasonable, wrongly accused family man had cracked, revealing the controlling narcissist underneath. Judge Solis pointed her gavel at my father. Mr. Carter, you will control yourself in my courtroom, or you will be removed. Another outburst like that, and I'll hold you in contempt. Do you understand? He nodded stiffly, but the damage was done. I saw jury members exchanging glances, saw the reporters scribbling furiously. Against his attorney's obvious advice, my father insisted on taking the stand during cross-examination. I watched him walk up with the confident stride of someone who'd spent his life talking his way out of consequences, charming people into believing his version of reality. But DA Rodriguez was methodical and relentless. She walked him through inconsistencies in his story, pointed out contradictions between his statements and the documented evidence. He became increasingly defensive, his answers shorter and more hostile. Mr. Carter, why did you purchase insulin if no one in your family is diabetic? It was for a medical emergency, he said, as if this explained everything. What emergency? He stared at her, realizing too late that he'd trapped himself. I don't have to explain myself to you. Rodriguez let the silence stretch, let the non-answer hang in the air like an admission of guilt. Actually, sir, you do. That's exactly what this court is for. When the preliminary hearing concluded, Judge Solis looked down from the bench with an expression of barely concealed disgust. I find sufficient probable cause on all charges to proceed to trial. The defendant will remain free on bail with electronic monitoring. Trial date will be set within 90 days. As we left the courtroom, I heard someone behind me whisper to their companion, He looked guilty up there, even before any verdict. Guilty. Even before the verdict. The trial never happened. 2 weeks after the preliminary hearing, Mitchell Brennan contacted DA Rodriguez with a plea offer, faced with the mountain of evidence, the forensic accounting, the grandmother's video, Luella's testimony, the storage unit documents, Emma's recorded phone call. My father's legal team knew they couldn't win at trial. The plea agreement took another 3 weeks to negotiate, But eventually the terms were set. My father would plead guilty to fraud, embezzlement, and aggravated assault. The attempted murder charge would be reduced to aggravated assault based on the legal difficulty of proving intent beyond reasonable doubt, though everyone in that courtroom knew what he'd intended. In exchange for his plea, he would receive 12 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole after 8. My mother, who had cooperated fully with investigators and testified about my father's manipulation and control over family decisions, received a suspended sentence with 5 years of probation and 1,000 hours of community service, specifically at organizations serving abuse survivors. The sentencing hearing was held on a gray November morning. The courtroom was less crowded than it had been for the arraignment, but still full of familiar faces. Emma sat beside me now, just 2 weeks from her due date, her presence a reminder that this wasn't just about punishing the past, but protecting the future. The plea allocution came first, the formal moment where my father had to verbally admit to his crimes in open court. He stood before Judge Solis, his posture rigid, and spoke in a flat, effectless tone that contained not a shred of genuine remorse. I admit that on the night of March 15th I administered a sedative to my daughter Danielle Carter without her knowledge or consent. I admit that I used her credit card without authorization to charge approximately $20,000 for expenses related to my daughter Emma's wedding. I admit that I withdrew funds from a trust established by my mother-in-law for Danielle's benefit, and used those funds for personal expenses not authorized by the trust terms. I admit that I failed to report significant income on my tax returns for a period of 7 years. Each admission was delivered like a legal formality, words required by the plea agreement, but empty of any real acknowledgement of harm. He wasn't sorry. He was caught. Then came the victim impact statements. Judge Solis invited me to speak first, and I walked to the podium with notes I'd written and rewritten a dozen times, trying to capture everything I needed to say. I grew up feeling invisible in my own family. I began, my voice steady despite the emotion churning inside me. I worked constantly to earn love that was never truly available, trying to be good enough, helpful enough, selfless enough that my parents would finally see me the way they saw my sister. I spent 38 years thinking I was the problem, but I wasn't. The problem was a family system built on manipulation, conditional love, and the belief that children exist to serve their parents' needs rather than being valued for who they are. I looked at my father, who stared at a point somewhere past my shoulder, refusing to meet my eyes. I don't hate you, I said, and I meant it. I pity you. You had a daughter who would have loved you freely without conditions, without performance. You chose manipulation instead. You had opportunities for genuine connection, real relationships, a life of meaning. You chose lies and fraud and ultimately violence. The person you hurt most wasn't me. It was yourself, because you'll never know what real love feels like. Emma spoke next, her statement briefer but no less powerful. My daughter will be born in 2 weeks, she said, one hand resting on her belly. She'll never know her grandfather. That's not my punishment of you, that's your punishment of yourself. You chose money and appearances and pride over actual relationships with your daughters. And now you have none of those things. No money, no good reputation, and no relationship with your children or grandchild. That's the consequence of your choices. Judge Solis sentenced my father to the agreed-upon 12 years, and I watched as bailiffs approached him with handcuffs. He stood there, this man who'd once seemed so powerful and in control, and allowed himself to be shackled. As they led him away through the side door reserved for prisoners, he glanced back once, and for a fraction of a second, our eyes met. I saw something there, fear maybe, or regret, or just the dawning realization that the rest of his life would be spent behind bars because of choices he'd made. Then he was gone, and I was still standing. Emma and I walked out of the courthouse together, her arm linked through mine for balance. Outside, reporters called questions that we ignored. Cameras flashed, but it all felt distant and unimportant. We got into Laura's car, and as we drove away from the courthouse, Emma asked quietly, "Do you think he'll ever understand what he did? Really understand it?" I watched the courthouse disappear in the side mirror, thinking about my father sitting in a cell somewhere, starting to comprehend that this was his reality now. "I don't know," I said honestly, "but understanding isn't my responsibility anymore. I'm free of that now." And that realization that I was no longer responsible for fixing them, explaining them, managing their emotions, or earning their love felt like finally setting down a boulder I'd been carrying since childhood. My shoulders felt lighter, my breath came easier. Justice served. But freedom. That was just beginning. 1 year after my father's sentencing, I stood in a community center in downtown San Jose, preparing to officially launch the Silver Lantern Fund. The name honored my grandmother, whose antique silver lantern had always sat in her front window, a beacon she'd told me was meant to guide lost souls home. Now her lantern sat on the podium beside me, polished, until it gleamed, symbolizing the light we hoped to provide for people escaping the darkness of family financial abuse. The room was packed with over 100 people. Some were potential donors and community supporters, but many were survivors who'd heard about the organization through therapy networks and support groups. They'd come to share their stories, to witness the creation of something that might have helped them years ago, to be part of building a safety net that hadn't existed when they'd needed it most. Laura stood at the side of the room, her role as legal director already making a difference in 3 active cases. She'd volunteered to work pro bono, coordinating with other attorneys to provide consultation on complex financial abuse situations that straddled family law, criminal law, and estate law. Watching her now, I felt overwhelming gratitude for the friendship that had sustained me through the darkest period of my life. Emma sat in the front row with 6-month-old Grace Margaret, named after our grandmother. The baby slept peacefully in her mother's arms, oblivious to the significance of the moment. Emma had completed her early childhood education certification and was working part-time at a Montessori school while raising Grace. She'd found her calling in helping children learn and grow in environments that nurtured rather than controlled them. I began my speech with the story of my grandmother, how she'd seen the dysfunction in our family and done everything in her power to protect me from beyond the grave. "She left me more than money," I told the assembled crowd. "She left me proof that I wasn't crazy, that what I experienced was real and documented and witnessed. She left me the tools to fight back and the resources to build something better. The Silver Lantern Fund exists because she believed that one person's courage to break a cycle can light the way for others." I explained what the fund would offer: grants to help victims establish financial independence and escape abusive family situations, connections to therapists specializing in family trauma, legal consultations for those navigating complex estate and fraud cases, and educational resources about recognizing and preventing financial abuse. "We're not broken," I said, looking out at the faces of people who understood exactly what I'd survived. "We're not bitter. We're builders of something better." After the formal presentation, people approached with their own stories, and I listened to each one, seeing my experience reflected in theirs with variations. A man whose mother had stolen his identity and ruined his credit. A woman whose siblings had manipulated their dying father into changing his will. A young person whose parents had taken out student loans in their name and pocketed the money. Each story was unique, but the pattern was devastatingly familiar. Mrs. DeLuca from the church auxiliary approached with Father Tom and several other church members. She handed me an envelope, and when I opened it, I found a check for $3,500, the exact amount my mother had embezzled from the Emergency Assistance Fund. "We can't undo the past," Mrs. DeLuca said, "but we can invest in the future. This is our way of turning something wrong into something right. Your grandmother would be proud of you, Danielle." Even more unexpected was seeing Luella Green enter the community center with a boy who could only be Mason. He was 11 now, tall for his age, with my father's distinctive features, but a gentle expression that was entirely his own. Luella looked nervous as she approached me after most of the crowd had dispersed. "I hope it's okay that we came," she said. "I wanted to support what you're doing, and I wanted to apologize in person. I didn't know what your father was really doing. I didn't know about you, about the trust fund, about any of his plans. I'm so sorry you were hurt because of my relationship with him." I looked at Mason, who was examining the silver lantern with curious eyes, and felt something shift inside me. This child was innocent in all of this, a half-brother I'd never known existed, damaged in his own way by our father's lies and secrets. "You and Mason aren't responsible for his choices," I said. "He hurt all of us, just in different ways. If you're willing, I'd like Mason to know his sisters. He has a niece now, and she should know her uncle." Luella's eyes filled with tears. "I'd like that very much." 6 months earlier, I'd purchased my childhood home from the bank after it had been foreclosed. Emma had been horrified when I first told her, thinking I was being masochistic, returning to the scene of so much pain. But I explained my vision, and she'd eventually understood. Using trust fund money that was now legally and rightfully mine, I'd converted the house into headquarters for the Silver Lantern Fund. My old bedroom became a private counseling office where therapists met with clients. Emma's room was transformed into a resource library filled with books on family dynamics, financial literacy, legal rights, and healing from trauma. The kitchen, where I'd been drugged, was now a warm, welcoming community space where support groups met every Tuesday evening, sharing coffee and stories and strategies for survival. I kept one room exactly as my grandmother had left it, a small memorial space with her memory box, the quilt with its hidden ledger photographs from better times, her reading glasses and jewelry. It was a reminder that families were complicated, that love and harm could coexist, that understanding the past didn't mean being trapped by it. The grand opening of the Silver Lantern House was scheduled for Christmas Eve, a symbolic rebirth of a space that had held so much darkness. Then the doorbell rang on Christmas Eve. The Silver Lantern House was transformed for Christmas Eve, every room glowing with warm light and decorated with garlands Emma had painstakingly hung while I worried about her climbing ladders so soon after giving birth. The silver lantern itself sat in the front window exactly as it had in my grandmother's house, a beacon visible from the street. We'd invited all the families the fund had served over the past year, and the house was full of voices and laughter, children running through rooms that had once held only tension and secrets. Emma moved through the gathering with Grace in her arms, introducing people to each other, making sure everyone felt welcome. Motherhood had changed her in ways I was still discovering. She was quieter now, more thoughtful, less concerned with performing perfection. She'd completed her early childhood education certification and was working 3 days a week at a Montessori preschool, bringing home stories about teaching children that the world was a safe place to explore and make mistakes. Watching her with Grace, I saw her breaking the cycle in real time, offering her daughter the unconditional love neither of us had received. Laura arrived with her husband David and their 2 kids, bringing homemade cookies and the easy warmth of old friendship. "Look at this place," she said, standing in what used to be our dining room and was now a resource library. "You've turned a crime scene into a sanctuary. Your grandmother would be so proud, Danny." Even Luella and Mason came, still navigating the awkward reality of being connected through a man who'd betrayed everyone. Mason was shy but curious, watching Grace with the fascination of a boy who'd grown up as an only child, suddenly discovering he had sisters and a niece. He asked intelligent questions about the Silver Lantern Fund, and I could see the wheels turning in his young mind, trying to understand how something good had emerged from his father's crimes. As the evening wound down and families began departing with tired children and full hearts, I stood in the kitchen cleaning up wrapping paper and paper plates, feeling something I hadn't felt in years: contentment. Not happiness exactly, not yet, but a sense that I was building something meaningful from the wreckage of my family. That's when the doorbell rang. I opened the door to find my mother standing on the porch, and for a moment, I didn't recognize her. She looked like she'd aged a decade in the year since sentencing. Her hair, always so carefully colored and styled, was mostly gray now and pulled back in a simple ponytail. She wore jeans and a plain sweater instead of her usual coordinated outfits. She looked smaller, diminished, like someone who'd been hollowed out and was slowly learning to fill the space with something other than pretense. "I know I'm not invited," she said before I could speak. But I've been completing my community service hours here at Silver Lantern like the judge ordered, working with the support groups, hearing other women's stories. Her voice cracked slightly. I've heard my own story told back to me 100 different ways, Danny. Women who were hurt by their mothers, their fathers, their families. And I finally understood what I did to you. What I stole from you. I'm not asking to come in. I just wanted to give you this and to say that I'm sorry. Truly sorry. Not because a judge ordered me to be, but because I finally understand and I can never give back what I took. She held out a wrapped package, her hands trembling. I took it, feeling Emma come up behind me with Grace. Inside was our grandmother's recipe box, the wooden one with hand-painted flowers that had been passed down through 3 generations. I'd wondered what happened to it after the house was foreclosed. Opening it, I found the familiar recipe cards in my grandmother's handwriting. My great-grandmother's handwriting recipes that carried the history of women trying to feed and nurture their families. But tucked between the recipes were letters, dozens of them, all in my mother's handwriting. I pulled one out and scanned it quickly. It was addressed to me, dated 3 months ago, written as part of her therapy homework. She'd documented her childhood, her fears, the patterns she'd inherited and perpetuated. The letters didn't excuse what she'd done, but they explained the generational trauma that had shaped her into someone capable of such harm. The final letter was different. I'm signing over my portion of your grandmother's estate to the Silver Lantern Fund, it read. After legal fees and restitution, it's not much, about $15,000. But it's something. I can't undo what I did, but maybe I can help you do what you're doing. Breaking the cycle. I couldn't break. Your grandmother tried to teach me. I was too broken to learn. But you learned, Danny. You learned. I stood there holding the recipe box, my mother on the porch looking at me with genuine remorse for the first time in my life. Emma shifted Grace in her arms and the baby made a small sound. My mother's eyes went to the bundle and I saw naked longing cross her face. This is Grace Margaret, Emma said quietly. Your granddaughter. I looked at Emma, a silent question passing between us. We'd talked about this possibility, about what we'd do if our mother tried to re-enter our lives. We'd agreed on boundaries, on conditions, on the understanding that understanding didn't equal forgiveness, and forgiveness didn't equal forgetting. Emma nodded slightly, her permission. I turned back to my mother. Would you like to meet your granddaughter? My mother's face crumbled, tears streaming down her cheeks as she nodded wordlessly. We invited her in, not into the whole house, but into the kitchen. The room where she'd once drugged me, now transformed into a space where broken people gathered to heal. Emma handed Grace to her grandmother carefully, and I watched my mother hold the baby with a gentleness I'd never experienced from her whispering apologies and promises to do better. We didn't bake cookies that night, but the recipe box sat on the counter between us. A bridge between generations, a reminder that cycles could be broken and healing was possible even when it came slowly and imperfectly. Healing tastes like grandmother's Christmas cookies and forgiveness without forgetting. The 3 of us stood in the Silver Lantern kitchen, an unlikely trio brought together by shared blood and shared damage, attempting something that felt both simple and impossibly complicated: baking our grandmother's Christmas cookies. Emma pulled out the recipe cards from the box, her fingers tracing the familiar handwriting, while Mom tied an apron around her waist with trembling hands. Grace watched from her bouncer, making small sounds of contentment, oblivious to the weight of the moment. At first, the silence was thick and awkward, broken only by the sound of measuring cups and mixing bowls. We moved around each other carefully, like strangers learning a dance. But gradually, muscle memory took over. Emma sifted flour the way Grandma had taught us, creating a small cloud that made Grace laugh. I creamed butter and sugar with the exact motion I'd learned at this same counter 2 decades ago. Mom rolled dough with practiced efficiency, and when Emma struggled to get the cookies perfectly round, Mom showed her the trick of using a light touch and rotating the cutter slightly, knowledge passed down from Grandma years ago. She taught me that when I was about your age, Mom said quietly, and there was such sadness in her voice that I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. We worked in a silence that slowly became less uncomfortable, the rhythm of baking creating a temporary truce. When the first batch came out of the oven, filling the kitchen with the scent of vanilla and butter and cinnamon, Emma said softly, "I want Grace to know her grandmother, but things are different now. We're building something different than what we grew up with." Mom's hand stilled on the rolling pin. "I know. I'm grateful to be allowed to try." After the cookies were done and boxed up most to be given away at tomorrow's community dinner, Mom asked hesitantly if she might visit again. "I'd like to see Grace grow up if you'll let me. I'd like to be part of whatever you're building here." Emma and I looked at each other, a conversation passing between us without words. We'd spent hours in therapy discussing exactly this scenario, preparing our boundaries, deciding what we could offer without sacrificing our safety. "Here's what we can offer," I said, keeping my voice gentle but firm. "Supervised visits with Grace here at Silver Lantern once a month. You can attend public events. You can write letters. But you don't get unfiltered access to our lives. You don't get to be in our homes. We need those spaces to be safe, and right now they're only safe when we control the access. Maybe that changes someday, but maybe it doesn't. This is what we can offer now." I watched Mom's face as she processed this, saw the familiar emotions flicker across it. Disappointment hurt the impulse to argue. The old version of her would have pushed back, would have made this about her pain, would have demanded more. But she took a breath and nodded. "That's more than I deserve," she said. "Thank you." After she left, after the kitchen was cleaned and the last cookies were packed away, I stood alone in the front room looking at the Christmas decorations. On the mantel sat a snow globe I'd bought 6 months ago, similar to one I'd owned as a child before my father destroyed it in one of his rages. I'd saved allowance money for weeks to buy that original globe, and he'd smashed it against the wall during an argument I could no longer even remember the cause of. This new one showed a small house with golden light glowing in the windows, snow falling gently around it, everything peaceful and contained in its perfect glass world. I shook it and watched the snow swirl and settle, thinking about how much had changed in 2 years. Emma came to stand beside me, Grace asleep on her shoulder, the baby's tiny hand curled against her mother's neck. "Do you think we'll ever have a normal family?" she asked. I considered the question, really thought about it. "I don't know if normal exists, but I think we're building something real, something honest, where Grace grows up knowing she's loved not for what she achieves or how she performs, but just for being herself. That's what Grandma wanted for us. That's what we're giving her." I looked at the snow globe one more time, then deliberately turned away from it, turning instead toward Emma and Grace, toward the future rather than the past. I used to think freedom meant escaping the family. Now I know it means choosing who we are, regardless of where we came from. I'm not my father's victim anymore. I'm not my mother's scapegoat. I'm just Danny. And that's enough. Then later that night, after Emma had taken Grace home to the apartment they were renting 3 blocks away, I sat down with the journal Dr. Wong had encouraged me to keep. I'd filled 3 notebooks over the past 2 years, documenting the journey from victim to survivor to someone who was learning to simply be. I wrote, "They tried to make me small, to fit me into their narrative, to erase me when I no longer served their purposes. But I'm not a character in their story. They were characters in mine. This is my story, how I took poison and transformed it into medicine. How I took pain and transformed it into purpose. How I took a broken family and built a chosen one. I don't know what comes next. I don't know if my father will ever take real accountability, or if my mother's changes will last, or if the relationship with Emma will always be close, or if we'll drift apart as we heal differently. I don't know if Silver Lantern will help 10 people or 10,000, but I know this: I'm free. Free to make my own choices, my own family, my own meaning. And that freedom, that's the inheritance my grandmother truly left me. Not money, not property, but permission to be fully, completely, unapologetically myself. I don't look back anymore except to remember how far I've come. The rest of my life stretches ahead, unwritten, full of possibility. and it's mine. I closed the journal, walked to the window where the silver lantern glowed, and switched it off. The room fell into gentle darkness, lit only by the streetlights outside and the distant glow of neighboring houses. Tomorrow I would turn the lantern back on for the people who needed its light. But tonight, I could rest in the darkness knowing I was safe, knowing I was free, knowing I had built something that could never be taken from me. I closed the journal, turned off the silver lantern, and walked forward into a future they could never have imagined for me because it was mine to create. And that's where Danielle's story brings us today. 2 years after waking up alone in an empty house with a needle mark in her arm, she's built a life that her parents never could have imagined for her. Not because it's wealthy or glamorous, but because it's hers, completely and unapologetically hers. She's no longer the daughter desperately trying to earn love that was never freely available. She's no longer the family's emergency fund or emotional caretaker. She's a woman who took the worst betrayal imaginable and transformed it into purpose, helping others escape the same cycles of abuse that nearly destroyed her. Emma is raising Grace in an environment of unconditional love, breaking patterns that have existed for generations. Their mother is learning slowly and imperfectly what it means to take accountability and earn trust rather than demand it. And their father sits in prison facing the consequences of choosing money and control over genuine connection with his daughters. The Silver Lantern Fund continues to grow, providing resources and hope to people who thought they had nowhere to turn when their own families became their abusers. But here's what strikes me most about Danielle's journey. She didn't win by becoming bitter or cruel. She didn't win by seeking revenge in the heat of anger. She won by being methodical, patient, and strategic. She documented everything, built an airtight case, and let the legal system do what it was designed to do. She won by choosing healing over hatred, by building something constructive from her pain, rather than letting it consume her. And perhaps most importantly, she won by understanding that freedom doesn't mean running away from your past. It means choosing who you become regardless of where you came from. Now I want to hear from you because stories like this don't exist in isolation. How many of you watching this have experienced family dynamics where love felt conditional, where financial support came with strings attached, where you were made to feel guilty for having boundaries? Maybe you weren't drugged and robbed, but perhaps you recognize the pattern of being the responsible one. The caretaker, the one who's expected to sacrifice while others take. Or maybe you were the golden child like Emma, realizing too late that the pedestal you stood on was actually a cage. Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Your story matters, and sharing it might help someone else realize they're not alone, they're not crazy, and they're not imagining the dysfunction they've experienced. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think about your own family dynamics, or gave you hope that healing is possible even after profound betrayal, please hit that subscribe button. This channel is dedicated to telling stories that matter, stories about real people facing impossible situations and finding their way through. Every week we share narratives about resilience, justice, and the courage it takes to break cycles that have existed for generations. By subscribing, you're joining a community of people who believe that speaking truth about family dysfunction isn't being disloyal, it's being honest. And sometimes honesty is the most loving thing we can offer. I also want to ask you this. Do you think Danielle made the right choice in allowing limited contact with her mother? Some might say she should have cut ties completely, that someone who participated in attempted murder doesn't deserve a relationship with their grandchild. Others might argue that she's modeling exactly what breaking cycles looks like, setting firm boundaries while leaving room for accountability and change. There's no easy answer, and I suspect many of you have wrestled with similar questions in your own lives. What would you have done in her position? Let me know in the comments, and let's have a real conversation about what forgiveness looks like when the people who hurt you are family. Thank you for listening to Danielle's story. Thank you for being here. And remember, if you're in a situation where family members are financially exploiting you or making you feel like you're crazy for having boundaries, you're not alone. Resources exist. Help is available. And like Danielle discovered, sometimes the family you build is stronger than the one you were born into. Until next time, take care of yourselves. You deserve safety, respect, and love that doesn't come with conditions.